happened. It was a long night, glancing at the clock on the TV, waiting for morning to come, drifting in and out of sleep. Finally, Friday arrived. I got up early, shaved, showered, and dressed in a comfortable polo shirt. My hand was still sore, and the large bandage was becoming more of a hassle. I decided to see if I could move my appointment with Dr. Beetol up a day. I hadn't taken any pain pills in a while, and after a night without drinking, it felt like things were slowly getting better. Merciful Lord Hospital had been mostly cleaned up. The windows were repaired, the bullet holes filled, and painting was underway. Damaged furniture was being replaced, and although there were still a few extra police officers around, they were just there as a precaution. When I reached my office, it looked just as I had left it. I called to see if Dr. Beetol could see me earlier, and after leaving a message, they called back within half an hour to confirm an appointment for 9. While waiting, I organized my desk and cleared out some old papers I had been avoiding, when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," I said, and Father Michalis entered, closing the door behind him. I stood up. "Father, you're quick," I said, shaking his hand. "I learned to manage with little sleep during my seminary days when I stayed with cloistered nuns. We would get up at midnight to pray, work until 3, and then get a little more rest. Remarkable women," he said, shaking his head. "I caught a late flight last night and got in around 1. I had a feeling he had more reasons for coming so early. A morning flight would have been enough for any business. We sat down and started talking, first about the will, then about other matters. As we discussed, Dunstan's 4 children will divide his investments. Your wife wasn't treated kindly by the family. They were rather cold toward her. But the lawyer made sure things stayed civil. The kids will receive their shares in a few months. My business there wrapped up quickly. Our lawyer is still finishing some loose ends. But none of it concerns you." He looked at me directly and asked, "What do you plan to do now?" I took a deep breath and answered, "She hates me. She said she was with him because I'm a failure. She acted like their love was something special." I paused, realizing the bitterness in my voice, and waved a hand to apologize. She even gloated about their relationship, about how they spent time together. It was hurtful. I didn't expect that level of cruelty. Father Michalis shook his head. "This whole situation, I saw signs and didn't act. I knew he was seeing other women, but I didn't realize Karen Ann was one of them until right before the funeral. 4 I learned in management classes that private matters should stay with the people involved. That's a mistake, especially for an organization focused on doing what's right. If I know about it, it can't really be private. I'll think about this, and I'll change how I handle these situations in the future." Looking at my life, I tried to be objective. I wasn't disgusted. I felt empty. "We're in our late 20s, Father. This should be our time for starting families and building lives together, and here I am alone. My wife doesn't want to be with me, and I wonder if I've lost all my good dreams." He looked at me thoughtfully. He was a Jesuit. He said, "I know you are struggling with your faith, but I hope you find your way back to God, John. I only met Karen Ann a couple of times, but I hope she discovers a more loving way to see things. It seems you might soon be distant from the children you've worked hard for all your life. Don't give up. You can overcome this. You have it in you. I believe in you." His hand rested on my shoulder. "The God solution, right?" I said. He often spoke about solving problems in a calm way and taking time for reflection. He didn't believe in quick fixes, and we called it his God solution when he wasn't around. "Always," he replied, smiling. "So you need to leave your home tonight?" "Yes, my things are in my car. I could go to my parents, but seeing me might upset them more, especially about Karen Ann and the kids." "I have an idea. I know someone who could use help with his bills. He wouldn't charge you rent but might ask you to share chores and groceries. I can probably set that up today. Just give me until the afternoon. If you're not around, I'll come find you." "Thank you, Father," I said. I had never thought of Landon McCalls as a friend, but it seemed he cared. "When do you get your hand checked?" he asked. "At 9 today." "Well, Tara is the best. We can talk about your job after that. A lot is changing for you quickly, so I'll give you a quick overview. Most big hospitals have a team that helps with professional growth. It's similar to what you're helping with now, but more organized. I'd like to start that team and expand your role. Right now, departments manage things on their own, but we need a better system as we grow. Think about it. I don't know when it would start. Maybe early next year, once we get approval and make some changes. I'll keep you updated. Father, I don't know what to say. It sounds like a big opportunity. He nodded, looking directly at me. Yes, it does sound promising. Dr. Beatol examined my hand and was able to make my next bandage much smaller. I could now wear regular shirts, but buttoning them was tricky since my other hand was still recovering. She asked me to come back in a week. When we were alone in the examination room, she closed the door and said, I know there's a reason to keep your name out of the news, but I wanted to say, I think what you did was very brave. I thought you were shot by the attackers. I didn't know you were the one who stopped it. How did you get shot? She looked sincere and showed respect. I hadn't seen much of that lately. One of them had a gun aimed at a woman's head. I was worried that if I shot him, he might pull the trigger, so I moved the gun away as I shot. The bullet hit him and then my hand. She shook her head. And you still went after the other one? You really are a hero, John. You saved many lives, and soon it will be okay for people to know. I hope. Thank you for your kind words, I replied with a smile. If I had been a bit more careful, I might not have hurt myself. I appreciate everything, Tara. I'll see you in a week. My phone rang when I got back to my office. It was already a busy Friday, and I hadn't done any of my usual work. Hello? John? It was Karen Ann. I didn't say anything. John? I heard you. Just say what you need to say. I shouldn't have said what I did, John. There was silence. Finally, I spoke. I used to think you were incredible, Karen Ann. I told everyone I had married the best person ever. I realize I was wrong about some things. We can fix this if we... Please stop, Karen Ann. No man with any respect could stay married to someone who felt that way about him. There's no point in talking. What do you want from me? What could we rebuild? I asked. I can't be married to you. You threatened to... But my voice faltered. I wanted to sound strong, yet no words came. John, you're being unfair. Don't you care about the kids? That made me find my voice. Unfair? This is about respect. You've made our kids into possessions I have no say over. You left me and took them. You threatened to say terrible things about our lives. That is not being unfair. A father is more than just a man. He does what is best for his family, even when it's hard. I'm struggling, but I have to do what's right. I will sign your papers soon. You're harsh. Now my words were firm as I finally understood my feelings and what I faced. I don't take the loss of my family lightly. You broke us apart. How could you think of accusing me of anything bad? No one cared for those kids more than I did, not even you. I paused, then added, Did Dunstan even know them? Did he hold them or play with Dylan? Silence followed. This silence felt heavy and meaningful. I realized he didn't know either child well and didn't want to. That's his loss, I thought. Where do we go, John? She asked, and I sensed for the first time that she understood she had completely broken us apart. You brought Ruggieri into our family, I said, my anger rising. May God forgive you for what he brought into our lives. I shook my head, and there was silence on the call. Why was she still listening? Regret, loss, confusion. The kids still have a chance. Maybe you can help them build a good life, I said quietly, feeling frustrated. But do me 2 favors. First, stop using my name. If you want, the kids can keep it. You've joked about it enough. I paused, imagining her agreeing on the other end of the line. You mentioned 2 favors, she replied. Yes, take responsibility for this mess of a marriage. Goodbye. She didn't respond. There was a long pause. I rarely used such strong words. I could hear her breathing. I wanted her to know I was still there, so I kept the line open. Eventually, I heard her hang up. I called my lawyer right away and told him I was ready to sign the papers. I drove to his office, where he greeted me with a casual handshake. Looks like things have calmed down, he said. Yeah, my wife called, wanting to fix everything, but it's too late for that. We sat down, and I paused as more feelings washed over me. Having low expectations shouldn't be enough to keep a marriage. He nodded and took out the papers, showing me where to sign. It wouldn't work out. Men often struggle to get past the hurt, especially when they feel another person is involved. Only when it's necessary for the kids. I agreed. She has some money now. I signed with my left hand, making messy shapes, trying to push down the tears I felt welling up. Maybe this is for the best, he said. I nodded, unable to speak. I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the table. I'll handle everything. In a month or so, it should be finalized. I'll let you know when it's official. I stood and shook his hand. I shook my head because I couldn't trust myself to say anything. Something ended when I signed those papers. My love had been real. You never fully recover from the end of a family, even one that was as troubled as mine. I returned to the hospital around 1 o'clock and saw Father McCalls helping some people toward my office. When I walked in, he spotted me. "Mr. Buck, some folks wanted to talk to you." That's when I recognized Tony Spagnol, his mother Marilyn, and another man I didn't know. Tony rushed into my arms and his mom followed, hugging me next. "Hello, hello," I greeted, laughing as I hugged them back. Mrs. Spagnol said, "We wanted to thank you for all you've done for us. This is my husband, Cal." Cal stood up slowly. I extended my left hand. "John Buck," I said. "Cal Spagnol," he said, pronouncing it Spaniel like the dog, which cleared up a small mystery, and we shook hands with our left hands. He was using a crutch. "We came to take Cal home that morning when the trouble started," she explained. "Knee surgery," she added. "I hope everyone is all right," I said. Father McCalls was smiling, trying to ease the worries. It was nice to meet them. The Spanyols weren't giving out their names in case it wasn't safe. We chatted for a bit. Cal asked about my hand, and I told him how it happened. He nodded, realizing my injury was to help his wife. Then Marilyn and Tony decided to leave. Cal leaned closer to me and said, "Thank you for what you did, Buck. I appreciate it. I can never repay you." He shook his head, and then my hand, holding the crutch under his arm. I shook my head. "I would do it again. You would too if you were there." Cal nodded, and soon Marilyn, Cal, and Tony were gone. Father McCall smiled as they left. He was helping me feel better. "Thanks, Mike," I said quietly. He liked that I called him by his first name. "Maybe I can get through this. We can find you someone to talk to if you want. No cost. The hospital can help." I shook my head. "No, you've done enough. I talked to Karen Ann a little while ago. She wanted to fix things, but it's too late for that. I signed the papers." He nodded. "I really don't like to see marriages fall apart. I believe two caring people can always work things out with time and help, but sometimes only one person really cares, and those relationships end long before they realize it. It's hard to." I paused, unsure of what to say next, and just shook my head. I mentally scolded myself. Why was I getting emotional in front of my boss? "Let's go for a ride," he said, moving past my feelings. "I'll drive." He took us a mile down the street. "I found you a place. No rent. You just cover utilities up to $300 and he will take care of the rest. It's a third of an old house. You'll have your own bathroom, a private entrance, or you can share the entrance, plus access to the kitchen and living room. The fireplaces work, and the place is in good condition." "That sounds great, Father." I felt overwhelmed. He parked behind the local Catholic church, Our Merciful God Parish. In Sky Gray, every Catholic place has Our Merciful in the name. "Get out," he said, and I stepped out. I suddenly understood his joke. I started to laugh, which surprised me. With everything that had happened, the shooting, my hurt hand, the divorce, and missing my kids, I really needed a laugh. "What's so funny?" he asked. "You got me an apartment in a priest's house? A rectory?" "Yeah, what's the big deal? It'll save everyone money. Come on, Phil's inside. He's your housemate." I was still chuckling as we climbed the steps. I guess I don't have to worry about him bringing friends home late. Probably not. But stay alert. We knocked on the door. I moved into my new place. I had my own bedroom in an old house built in the late 1800s. It had dark wooden floors, tall walls, thick plaster, chandeliers, 2 fireplaces, one in the living room and one in my room, comfy chairs, and a hint of old smoke in the air. The big, sturdy bed looked like it could stand through anything. This house was made for 3 priests in an earlier time when a big church could support them. It was the nicest place I had ever lived. Everything seemed to show the solid quality that lasted over the years. It felt old-fashioned, but I imagined famous writers working at the desk, or great leaders thinking by the fire. Paintings decorated the walls. Jesus watched from some corners, while Mary and Joseph looked down from others. There were pictures of various saints, including Saint Drogo, who was known as the Saint of the Less Attractive. I wondered if the person who hung that painting did it as a joke. I had never heard of the Infant of Prague or Saint Margaret of Chichester before. I began to understand the weight of guilt some Catholics feel. Father Philip was the local parish priest, older and quick with his words. He had come from another part of the archdiocese. I had the run of the house, my own bathroom, and a woman came in once a week to clean. I had to cook for both Father Philip and myself when I could. After one meal, Father decided to cook for us. He mentioned he was an alcoholic and asked that I not bring alcohol into the house. I promised him it wouldn't be a problem. I didn't have any anyway. With this simple agreement, I kept myself out of trouble. From that busy Friday on, my life began to slow down to a more manageable pace. The chaos of conflicts, family issues, and tough choices were hopefully behind me. Some of that was thanks to the two priests who helped me during a rough time. They gave me the gift of time and space. There was a simple idea they shared. Think things over, pray if you want, look at your options, and talk to people who can help. You will find a way forward. Even without the spiritual part, many would agree. Calm down, think things through, learn what you can, talk it out, and then make a decision. Watch how things unfold and react accordingly. I smiled at the thought. It was just like the scientific method. On the evenings when he was free, Father Philip and I started to have conversations. He was 67 years old, had worked as a chaplain during the Gulf War, and had done more baptisms, weddings, and last goodbyes than he could remember. He enjoyed playing poker, rarely lost, and liked to drink a little too much, which had caused him some problems. After overcoming his struggles, he was assigned to the Merciful God Hospital, a great position he had held for 13 years. He felt that his time there was coming to an end, as his health wasn't the best, and it was time for him to retire. He shared stories about the challenges he had faced over the years. He valued his connection with the local elementary school. He was modest about being single. We talked about our work, our lives, sports, and various topics, including debates about different gospels. He encouraged me to read parts of scriptures and novels, and even had me crawl under the old wooden table in the dining room to see the names of all the priests who had served there written in pencil. There were over 100 years of names noted. We would spend hours discussing those names and other topics on pleasant evenings. I cherished those quiet times filled with reading and friendly chats, and I was grateful that we both supported the same baseball team. I enjoyed those evenings together. Sometimes he would smoke a cigar on the porch, but he said he never smoked inside. I didn't want to share the details of my upcoming divorce or my involvement in the recent troubling events. As June passed and July arrived, the heat intensified. Our air conditioning worked well, but I still needed a fan to stay comfortable at night. I returned to my regular work hours, and during the second week of July, Father Michaelis came to discuss my job. He sat across from me and said, "You know, I've been thinking about how we can help you stay at the hospital. It's unfortunate to lose good people because they lack a clear career path in a growing place like ours. If you're interested, I want to share some ideas with the board." I felt grateful that he was trying so hard to assist me, treating me as if I had choices. "I'd like to send you to a program in Cleveland for new hospital leaders. They will teach you about the important rules for medical licenses and certifications. I believe they cover contracts for hospitals and doctors too. They have connections to programs globally. Sending a doctor for training shouldn't cost our hospital the benefit of that education. Once you return, we can create a program to help doctors recognize their strengths and weaknesses. We could also include nurses and other professions. It's important to build ongoing training into our professionals' contracts, so they choose to stay and serve in our community. I want the best doctors to remain here for their families to continue living in Sky Gray." That idea took a big hit with the tragedy. He shook his head. I realized he wanted to fight to show that Sky Gray was a good place to raise a family. He continued, "The program will help you earn some credits. Once you finish in Cleveland, I'd like you to start a course in health administration or hospital management. There are several programs that could be beneficial. Maybe you could also consider a course in hospital law, focusing on general practices. Down the line, a master's degree could be an option." "You want me to work toward a degree, Father?" I asked. "I do. You'll have some choices if you want to work at Merciful God as we begin a new department." I don't think one person could manage it all. Bigger hospitals often have a team to support doctors and nurses in improving their ratings. I've seen that before. Once you finish your training and start establishing a program, we might need an assistant and maybe even more help soon. I can guide you through this, but some aspects will be similar to what you've done, just on a more advanced level. We'll arrange for you to complete a program in hospital management, personnel, or something related, like law. A law degree could be useful. I had never felt this excited about my job before. The next step is to write it up. Can you start by looking into University Hospital in Cincinnati? They have many doctors and excellent facilities. I want to know how they handle things, so gather some notes and then write a short essay on what you find. The notes don't have to be perfect, but the essays should be good. I might need them for my discussions with the board. Aim to finish the first one in about a week. If you need more time, just let me know. You'll also need to meet with people there for interviews. Does that sound okay? I smiled. Yes, sir, I'll make those calls as soon as you leave. Start with the notes. I want to see what you discover. You can send them to me by email or on paper as often as possible. I can help you with phone calls if needed. I looked at him and thought about his intentions. I was sure he understood what this job would require. It reminded me of what I'd read in his resume, positions he had in other hospitals earlier in his career. He was teaching me, sending me to find out things he already knew, making sure I understood how a professional human resources department operates. Apparently, he believed in my abilities and wanted to guide me into a career. Great, sir. I know some people in that department at UC. I'll reach out to them right away. So my new job began. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, wondering if I was in over my head. But I had several people supporting me. I had my hand checked again by Dr. Beetol, who told me it was much better and praised her work. She advised me to keep wrapping it for the rest of the summer, and she provided some ointment to help with healing and prevent infections. The scars on my hand looked painful, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to make a fist again. I could move my fingers, but it hurt a bit. Weeks passed after the incident with hot days and warm nights. I hadn't seen the children or Karen Ann. My life felt comfortable but empty. Being unnoticed by others suited me, yet without my family, I felt a deep loneliness that no kind words from a priest could fill. I had always lived a quiet life. Aside from a couple of investigators and 2 priests, I didn't think anyone knew where I was, not even my parents. The news was still buzzing about who had taken down the attackers. A blurry video from a phone showed things clearly enough that I thought I could recognize myself, but I doubted anyone else could. No one would have pictured me in that situation, so it helped keep me hidden. The video captured the moment when the bullet hit my right hand. Fortunately, I was just one of many who had been hurt, so I didn't draw much attention to myself. The mayor of Sky Gray called me a hero and a humble man in an interview. Special Agent Remark was also asked about me and simply said, "We will not reveal this man's identity." One night I sat on the porch with Father Phil and pondered my future. We chatted about marriage, my divorce, and what was right. He didn't judge me. While he didn't approve of divorce, he felt that the real issue was in being unfaithful. To the church, divorce wasn't really accepted. He suggested I read a book by Evelyn Waugh about a divorced Catholic. Phil was always recommending books, and this one was a comedy, though it dealt with serious themes from World War II. But there was nothing funny about my divorce. It was official on July 24th. I didn't even have to be at the hearing. My lawyer brought the papers to me at the hospital. It all went as planned. He told me that the judge had noticed how messy my name looked on the document and explained it was because of my injury. He mentioned some things to my ex-wife, but she didn't say anything in return, and her lawyer didn't seem pleased. "Goodbye to that," I said, recalling a book title. We shook hands. "Good luck, John. I'm really sorry. I know this is not how you wanted things to go." I appreciated his understanding. I wasn't married anymore. I drove to my parents' house and showed them the divorce papers. It was a sad moment for all of us. Mom nodded silently, and Dad did too, but his words didn't seem important. After a brief hug, I left. There was nothing more to say or do. Dylan and Hanley were no longer in my life. There was nothing to be done, nothing at all. As Lord Byron said, the greatest joy in life is feeling that we are loved. Had Karen Ann ever loved me? Dylan was born just 2 months after we started living together. We weren't struggling, but life was getting busy with a child. I often wondered if I had ever really been loved. The answer felt clear. No. A strong no. That evening, Phil and I sat on the porch talking about my divorce. I felt sad. He called Father Mike to join us. We watched the stars and sipped iced tea, discussing Karen Ann and the kids, and how I wouldn't be able to help them anymore. I lifted my glass. Here's to celebrating a divorce with one single and two who aren't dating. We shared a laugh and clinked our glasses. I felt ready to share the story of my marriage with Phil. I took a sip of my drink and gestured as if letting something go. After the tragic event, my wife admitted she had been seeing someone else for a long time. Sean Dunstan, the doctor. She told me she wasn't sure if she ever really loved me. She called me a failure. It turns out the kids aren't mine. I love them, but I'm not their real father. I learned I had no strong case to ask for custody or even visit them. My wife threatened to say I mistreated them. After everything that happened, it was too much to bear. Father Mike brought me here. I paused for a moment. I truly appreciate it, Father. Are you Catholic? He asked. No, I don't really follow any religion. You are something, John. Anyone that knows you can see that. Not like the woman I married, I thought, but I admired his effort to lift my spirits. Father Mike stood up. I should head out. Thanks for a unique divorce party, both of you. I've never been to one before. I hear they can be quite lively. John, I'll see you tomorrow. He left, heading toward the hospital. I thought he would probably be busy all night. Unique? Sure, suffering can bring us closer to understanding life. I had to calm my thoughts. Phil then spoke softly. So about this Dunstan. He was a good doctor, right? I read he was one of the victims. Yeah, a great doctor, but... Phil stayed quiet, holding his iced tea like he might have held whiskey years ago. He looked at his drink. 2 broken marriages, yours and his. 2 children who don't know the truth in Hanley and Dylan. He lives far from his other children and wife. There were rumors of other affairs. He took a sip. We both looked at Venus shining in the dim evening sky. After a moment, I said, he saved a lot of lives through his work. Phil nodded. True, I'm sure Peter kept track of it all. Phil had a way of making a light joke even in serious times. About a week later, it was now August, and on Thursday evening, Phil and I were back on the porch discussing the news when he switched the topic. John, he began, I've noticed your sadness is still there. I understand the divorce has left you feeling upset, but I think there's more to it, right? I nodded as the evening grew darker. I'm a hospital administrator with not much pay. I earn less than a teacher, and there aren't many chances to move up. Right now, I'm hoping Father Mihalis can help me grow in my job. I'm excited, but also nervous that I might not succeed, or that my efforts won't lead to anything important, or that they might choose someone with more experience. So far, I've written 2 essays and shared notes about 2 hospital programs that we might use as guides. And I miss my kids and family life. Hanley is 4 months old and Dylan is 2 years. I really hope my next partner has high hopes, if there is a next partner. My mind is all jumbled with worry right now. Phil nodded. Your heart feels it too, he said quietly. The warm breeze didn't cool us off on the porch. I could hear music from a house across the street. He rocked gently in his chair while I relaxed in an Adirondack chair, feeling warm as the day continued. Phil finished his tea. It's warm tonight, isn't it? He said. Yeah, I replied. My iced tea was all gone. Phil looked down, then back at me. Would you like to join me for Mass tomorrow, John? This is my early one, just once a week. A few older men and a couple of women usually come. It would make me happy. I've never been to Mass before. I don't really believe, Father. He smiled and chuckled lightly. Oh, it's not so bad. We even call it a celebration. What else are you doing at 6:30? I'll wake you up. It was 5:30 when Philip knocked on my door. John, we leave at 6. Mass is at 6:30 in the building. The church was very close, so I had enough time to get ready. I even took a shower and shaved. I wrapped my hand in fresh bandages. We arrived at 6:05 and Philip went to put on his clergy robe. I sat alone in a pew and even knelt for a little while on the padded kneeler to pray. It was not bad at all. Actually kind of nice, even though it was early. A few older men came in, one using a walker. Two older women, a young man who looked about 25, and a small woman around 30 eventually showed up. Father entered, and Mass began. Philip moved through the service quickly. He had no assistants, so he handled all the tasks by himself. He also gave a short talk, and I listened closely. I felt like he was speaking to me, but later I learned he aimed his words at many of us. There are times when good people find themselves stuck. There can be confusion, betrayal, and disappointment. It may seem like there's no love for these good people, and it's easy to feel hopeless. But don't let hopelessness be the end. There's something good waiting for you afterwards. Find love again. Help someone else find love. There is goodness, there is joy, and there is life for all of us. Life itself is a precious gift. Accept that it is good, that feelings of sadness can end, and that love will come. You will find the best path if you are open to love. He looked at me and quoted Hugo, "It is not a big deal to die. It is terrible not to truly live." I had never thought about this idea involving responsibility. Had Dunstan never truly lived, or had he lived only a part of his life? Was I being encouraged to live fully? It's hard to understand how deeply many people consider themes of right and wrong or the meaning of life. Phil was one of those people I now saw. He seemed like an older man who wore his feelings openly, reading stories from writers like Garcia Marquez or John Galsworthy. But there was a lot of sense in his thoughts. Philosophy and understanding beyond tradition were part of every lesson he shared. Later, I wondered if he truly believed in all the teachings of his church, or if he accepted them because he saw a deep goodness at their core. When the service ended, Father Philip announced it politely, walked down the center aisle to the back of the church, and began chatting with the people there. Laughter and friendship filled the large, mostly empty Catholic building. I met Joe and Richard, two veterans of Korea and Vietnam, who greeted me warmly. I mentioned I had hurt my hand at work. They were impressed I had served and felt I was fortunate to have avoided combat. Sybil was an elderly woman from Florida. I later learned she moved to Sky Gray after her husband passed away. The young man left quickly, probably to get to work on time. Maria was a woman close to my age, with red hair and a shy look. She was very small and seemed to want to be even smaller. She seemed like she could be the most beautiful woman in any room. Philip took her hand gently in both of his, as if he thought she might run away, whispered something to her, and walked her over to me. I noticed for a moment that she was shaking, just a little. "Maria Gray, this is John Buck," Philip introduced us. She looked at me with her head slightly down, maybe wishing to lower her gaze. "Hello, John." "Maria, nice to meet you," I said, offering her my left hand. She hesitated for a moment, looking at my bandaged hand, before she reached out her left hand and we shook hands. This was a big moment for her, and Philip knew that and had arranged it perfectly. He held her right hand firmly during the introduction, not allowing her to slip away. Father nodded and found someone else to talk to, leaving us alone for a moment. We chatted for a few minutes. She spoke softly at first, forcing herself to look into my eyes with great effort. She worked weekdays from 7:30 to 3:30 cleaning rooms at a motel, so this early service worked well for her. I asked her if she came every week, and she said she had only been once before, just last week. Father had encouraged her to return, saying he wanted her to meet someone. It took me a moment to realize that he had been planning this for a week. I glanced back at him. I couldn't believe it. Maria was beautiful, but had been through a lot, and Phil, the priest, thought we should meet. My respect for him grew in that moment. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight after work?" I asked her. She looked a bit surprised, but then met my gaze and quietly said, "Yes, I'd like that. Should we meet somewhere, or can you pick me up? I don't have a car." "I'll pick you up. Can I have your address? I'll come by around 7. "Sounds good. I'll be ready." She quickly wrote down her address on a piece of paper from her purse. "I have to go now. Thank you for asking me. See you at 7? "Definitely." Father Phil and I walked back to the rectory together. "What do you know about Maria?" I asked him. "She mentioned she hasn't been coming to Friday Mass. Her family has been part of the church for a long time," he said. "In fact, they helped settle Sky Gray. Her dad works for the power company and her mom runs a daycare. Good people. Maria went through a tough time when she was younger and has difficulty connecting with others. I believe she sees someone for help. What happened? How did she get hurt? When she was around 21, she had a terrible experience with some young men that changed her outlook on life. Since then, she has found it hard to trust men. It's been tough for her to feel comfortable being part of society again. It's a positive sign that she is working now, attending Mass, and I heard you set up a date? I nodded. He said, "That's great." Yes, it really was great. Chapter 7. Maria. At 7, I found myself in front of an old house in sky gray. The white clapboard was aging and had a bay window. The 2-story home had a red tin roof and a nice porch with a swing. I knocked on the door. A large man, about 55, answered. He wore a clean khaki shirt, blue work pants, and running shoes that seemed a bit too big for him. "John?" he asked. "Yes, I'm here to see Maria." "Come in," he said, opening the door. "I'm Tom Gray." I raised my bandaged hand to show why we should shake left-handed. "I hurt my hand," I explained, grateful for the cool air conditioning that replaced the August heat. He motioned for me to sit in the living room. "Sally," he called. "John's here." Sally entered next, small like her daughter, with red hair and a pale complexion. "Nice to meet you, John. What's your last name?" "Buck. John Buck." I extended my left hand and she noticed my bandage a moment later, but still held on for a while, as if this meeting meant something special. "We're happy to meet you, John. Please, come in and sit." "Would you like a drink? Soda or water?" she asked. We sat together and waited. No, we should probably head out soon," I replied. The gray house felt lived in, like sky gray. The furniture was older and could use some fixing, and the chairs around the kitchen table didn't match. "So, what do you do, John?" Tom asked eagerly, as if he didn't often see Maria with someone new and wanted to ensure he asked good questions. "I work at Merciful Lord Hospital as an administrator. I organize meetings for doctors, help with lectures, and make sure everyone has their licenses, that kind of stuff," I explained. Tom nodded and then asked, "How did you hurt your hand?" "In an incident a couple of months ago," I replied. Tom and Sally looked interested. "Oh, you were part of that?" Sally asked. "A bit. We can't talk too much about it to keep some individuals safe, you know," I said, getting better at steering the conversation away from sensitive topics. "Well, I just want to be sure that Maria is okay with you," Tom said politely. "If you have concerns, I can," I began, but was quickly interrupted. "Don't even think about leaving," Maria said firmly from behind me. I turned to see her in a blue sundress that showed off her arms and framed her face beautifully. Her red hair was neatly pulled back. This was a different side of her compared to the shy girl at church. Maybe she felt more comfortable at home. She smiled. "I wasn't planning on it. You look lovely, Maria," I said, my gaze lingering. "Indeed you do," her mother added, and we all paused to appreciate her. "I made reservations," I said. "We should get going, but I'd love to chat more when we return." Tom replied, "I look forward to it." I explained, "We're just going to a restaurant outside of town, and we shouldn't be late. We met today, after all. And if you're worried, you could call Father Phil. He knows me well. I've been staying in your rectory since late June." Sally smiled. "You're the one. It was mentioned in Mass that he took on a guest since the house was so big, but he didn't say your name." "Of course, son," Tom said, standing next to Sally. "Take care of our girl." Sally then asked Maria, "Do you have your phone, the emergency numbers?" Maria nodded and looked away. "Have a good time," Sally said, with Tom agreeing. He gave me a serious look that showed how much he cared for Maria. We left and headed to dinner. I learned what those emergency numbers were while we ate. We chose an Italian restaurant that wasn't too fancy. It was easy to find down the road from the rectory, out in the countryside near Greenville. Our table was ready on time, even on a busy Friday night. We talked about Maria and why the priest had set us up together. She mentioned that after the incident 8 years ago, she fell into a deep sadness, became scared to leave her house, and even found it hard to talk on the phone. She had years of therapy, along with medicine for her anxiety and sadness. She never thought about hurting herself, but she kept to herself at home. After about 3 years of weekly therapy sessions, she decided to start running again. She used to be a good runner in high school. At first, her parents would follow her on a bike or in a car, but after some time they stopped, so she began to run by herself. She always picked busy places during the day. 2 years ago, she got a job at a motel, and now she goes out about once a week to shops or malls, usually with her mother. Sometimes someone would drop her off and pick her up. She also walks to church on her own, which is 3 blocks away. She still attends therapy every week. "So you understand why Father introduced us," she said. "But why did he bring you to me?" That made sense. I found it harder to talk about my marriage than the attack. I was married until recently. After the hospital incident, my wife admitted to having a long affair with one of the victims. She thought he would help her financially after his passing. She said she never really loved me. It turns out neither of our kids. I paused because my voice shook, and Maria placed her small hand on mine as I looked away. I glanced at her hand, resting softly on my own, and whispered, "Neither child is actually mine. They are 2 years old and the baby is 4 months." I took a moment, regained my strength, and spoke a bit louder. "She filed for divorce. I couldn't afford to fight for custody of kids who weren't biologically mine, and her lawyer warned me that she would claim I was abusive if I didn't agree to her terms. In the end, she got what she wanted, although she thought she would get money from the man's estate. He left her nothing, but the kids received quite a bit. She might struggle financially unless she uses their money or finds a summer job, or marries again soon. She's a teacher. I don't have to pay alimony or child support." I fell silent, feeling upset but without tears. "Do you care for the children?" "Yes," I replied, pain showing on my face, my voice softening. "But I'm not sure if that's good for me anymore. Dylan is the older boy, and Hanley is the girl. Their father was a surgeon at my hospital. He was involved with several women while also having a family in New England. My wife was unaware of any of this. Their affair lasted almost 3 years. She was very harsh when she told me, not realizing he had been misleading her. The kids might not remember me for long if Hanley ever really did. I wasn't sure what was best for them. Should I mention that I thought about leaving with them in the middle of the night? Maybe heading to some faraway place like Africa or the Amazon? The air was quiet, and we exchanged glances. She spoke up first. "You know I'm not looking for something casual, John. If it doesn't work out, it would be hard. And I'm not looking for that either." I paused. "Let's just see how things go. No pressure, no forcing anything." We enjoyed our wine and didn't mind the quiet moments. As we walked to her front door, I held her hand. She said, "I'd kiss you goodnight, but I think my parents want to talk to you." "Just a quick kiss then." She leaned in and kissed me. It felt nice having such a connection, and I enjoyed being tall beside her. I briefly told her parents about my injury while we shared a beer and watched the moon rise. I mentioned I had an accident where I hurt my hand. They smiled at my story, finding some humor in it. I settled into a comfy chair that seemed quite old. After a bit, Maria came over and sat beside me, resting an arm around my shoulders. "In the end, I hurt myself a little, but that's all," I explained. Tom looked unsure. "You're right-handed?" I nodded, tilting my head toward him. "So, how did—" He seemed to have an idea. He must have seen me using my left hand in a video. Perhaps he noticed my right hand move right before the accident. I met his gaze as he chose to remain quiet, and I thought I saw him nod slightly. I filled the silence. It was getting late, and a dinner date on the same day you meet someone is a bit unusual. "Mr. and Mrs. Gray, I understand Maria has ties to the town's founders. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. I'm leaving now, and I hope it's all right for me to see Maria again. I'll be in touch very soon," I said, smiling. She walked with me to the door and closed it softly behind me. August nights in Ohio can be very warm, and by the time I got to my car, I was sweating. It reminded me that all relationships face challenges eventually. We had met in the morning, shared our thoughts, and kissed. That felt like enough for one day. I had experienced loss with Karen Ann, Dylan, and Hanley, and nothing was certain. I craved something real and emotional to help me stay strong. Maybe it could last. So began the easy part of getting to know Maria Gray. Days went by slowly. I called and we chatted for a few minutes on Sunday. I saw her jogging on Tuesday afternoon. I called Maria's parents on Wednesday to see if it was okay for me to pick her up from work when she finished. I thought it would be nice to give her a ride and have a chance to chat. Her mom thought it was a good idea, but warned that Maria might be a bit messy from her job. I bet she still looks great, I said. Her mom seemed pleased and told me where to park so I wouldn't miss her. I got there a bit early and leaned against my car so she could see me. At 3:35, she stepped out with another woman, laughing. When Maria spotted me, she paused and touched her hair. Her friend noticed her hesitance and exchanged a look with her. Maria smiled and shook her head. Then she took her friend's hand and walked over to me. "Hi, I thought I'd give you a ride home," I said as they approached. "Do you have room for Eva? Eva, this is John Buck. John, this is Eva Dominguez Lopez Villardo," she said with a laugh. I extended my hand to Eva, who looked to be in her 40s. "Nice to meet you, Eva," I said. She replied, "So, you're the guy Maria has mentioned." "I'm glad to hear that. Hop in, ladies, and I'll need directions." They both laughed, and I noticed a more open side of Maria that had surfaced, much like her confidence at home. They chatted about work, sharing funny stories about their boss, their families, and Eva's kids. Everything Eva said seemed to spark joy in Maria's eyes and brighten her voice. There was a quiet vulnerability in Maria, like she was balancing on a tightrope, and it wouldn't take much to tip her. She often spoke softly, especially at the beginning of our conversations. It seemed that every day she faced a desire to withdraw from everything around her. She often preferred to just stay still, not work, not eat, not go out, not watch TV, not read, not clean, or not play. Starting any activity was a challenge for her. It took some time and conversations with her and her mother to realize that a difficult experience had changed her deeply. So I tried to see her every other day. I wanted her to know she could rely on me without feeling overwhelmed. After our first meeting, I began to pick her up from work, or I would wave when I saw her jogging or just call to check in. As time went on, I started visiting her unannounced, and her mother always seemed happy to see me. Sometimes I would call and we'd meet at the ice cream shop or Starbucks. We went to 2 baseball games together as the Dayton Dragons season came to an end. I also took her to a show in Cincinnati one Sunday afternoon so we wouldn't be out late. She invited me to her cousin's wedding and we shared a dance there. Once again, I felt how nice it was to hold a woman in my arms. She was small and slender. I reacted to her like a man does to a woman, which seemed to surprise her. She paused her breathing for a moment when she felt me next to her. During those first 2 months, August and September, she introduced me to her family, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and even an old high school boyfriend. I found myself feeling a bit jealous, even though 12 years had passed and he was married with a child. It was nearly 3 months after the incident at the hospital when Homeland Security agents arrested all known members of a dangerous group in the U.S. 14 members were arrested in several cities, including Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and Detroit, and even on a farm about 30 miles south of Fort Wayne, Indiana. They had hidden dangerous items there, thinking the quiet countryside would help them go unnoticed. Homeland Security acted because they had evidence of another attack being planned, although they didn't share the specifics. It turned out a major attack was being prepared for the holiday season, but no details or targets were revealed. This group was small and very radical, mostly made up of people from the Middle East who wanted to spread fear in America. Their leader, Ahil Ali, was a minor cleric with some dark ideas about power. He tried to fight back against federal agents in Minneapolis but was captured when he ran out of ammunition. A couple of members fought fiercely at the farm, but most were caught while they were asleep. The federal agents felt confident that they had caught the entire group in the U.S. Most of the remaining members were known to be in the Middle East. I received a call from Agent Remark the day after the arrests. "Mr. Buck, this is Special Agent Remark." "Yes, don't you ever get tired of saying Special Agent? I'd think you'd have to explain what makes you special." "Yeah," he laughed. "But I can't just say agent or officer. It's a rule. I have some good news. You should see it on the news. We believe we've caught all the members of that group connected to the attack on your hospital. At least, all the ones in this country. We will be having a meeting tomorrow to talk about your privacy, but it's likely that it will be lifted. You probably won't have any more danger than anyone else. I'll call you after the meeting to update you on what we decide." "That's good to hear. I appreciate my privacy, though. It sounds like you all have been doing important work." "Yes, that's true. I haven't slept a full night in 2 months, he said, pausing for a moment before continuing. Hey, did you ever tell your wife about what happened that day? No, she divorced me a week after the incident. Anyway, thanks for calling and let me know what happens after the meeting either way. And try to get some rest. Will do, Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck? He asked hesitantly. Yeah, I replied. It's just, what you did was really something. You saved the hostages and stopped the threat in just a few seconds. We enhanced the video footage, but we couldn't quite fix the audio. What did you yell? And then you said something after that. I think I gave the old Marine shout, "Oorah," or something like that. Afterward, I said, "You messed with the wrong Marine." I'd heard it in a movie and was all fired up, I said with a small smile. That explains it. The guys have been getting a good laugh out of it. Not exactly original. Thanks, Eric. Tomorrow. Click. The next day, Remark called around 10 a.m. and informed me that all the records related to the Merciful Lord incident, except for a classified file about Homeland Security techniques, were going to be made public immediately. I thanked him. I appreciated all the hard work that must have gone into making those arrests. They seemed confident they had caught everyone dangerous, but I wondered how they could be so sure. I guessed they were as certain as anyone could be. It turned out they missed one. He was hiding nearby, scared, probably wondering if he would be next. Eventually, I spoke to Remark again, and he explained how carefully they had built their case. It had been slow, detailed work, but thorough. They used methods that mapped out connections between people, like how teachers create seating charts for classrooms, except more complex. They built these web diagrams showing how different individuals were linked, checking each connection. Some groups were flagged as potentially dangerous, while others were dismissed as false leads. The process was now a well-tested one, used successfully in other cases. Every contact was important, no matter how minor, from a store clerk to an acquaintance of a suspect. It was a constant, exhausting effort day and night. But in all that work, they missed one sympathizer. He remained unknown, out there somewhere, holding a grudge. There was only one cryptic email from a member of the group that even mentioned him, and with so many others to sift through, it was overlooked. Even when they finally reviewed it, the message was unclear. It all started with one word. Ahil Ali asked Yusef Talib if he had a resource, and Yusef replied, "Yas." A Homeland Security analyst thought this meant money, as they often did. The analyst assumed they had just spelled yes wrong. Terrorists often made mistakes like that, but the resource actually referred to a person, not money. This person was young and inexperienced. How he was linked with the group wasn't clear to Homeland Security at first. Yassin was Yusef's younger brother and was not far away, just an hour and a half from Indianapolis. Yas was heartbroken when he learned of his brother's death. All this happened while the group was facing a serious situation. After the chaos, he fell silent. He continued working as a night clerk at the motel, but he could no longer afford college. He knew he had to stay hidden, but he was unsure about his future. Fearing that the government was searching for him, he kept his brother's gun beside his bed. He had fake identification and a passport, but his student visa had run out. Homeland Security made a big mistake, but it was an honest one. Yassin was mostly unknown to the IWC. When he stopped communicating with his contact in Saudi Arabia, they assumed he had been caught or killed. For 15 months, he kept to himself, only reaching out to friends and family in the Middle East carefully online. Bill Meyer and Randy Winger were the guards who faced the attackers in the cafeteria that terrible morning. I found them down the hall at their usual spot after I spoke with Remark. I told them the files were going to be opened, and we talked about losing our anonymity. They agreed to keep my name out of it as I wished. However, I realized that it might not matter anymore since the police reports would show my name for everyone to see. I simply asked them to be truthful and not add any extra details. I believed they had stopped the violence by standing up to the attackers. I was ready to say as much if someone asked, but I preferred to avoid interviews because I thought they wouldn't help. I wondered if people would remember me for that one brave moment. I also wondered if I wanted that kind of attention. I realized that I had often hidden behind a belief in being humble, which made me shy and kept me out of conflicts. I avoided serious arguments and didn't take strong stands. I wasn't known as a Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, believer or non-believer. I was just a nice guy who chose to look away instead of standing up to someone assertive. Maybe I had joined the Marines because I saw this flaw in myself and hoped they would help me change. When I got home, I sat with my parents and we talked about that day. I told them everything that happened, including the incident with my hand. My mom looked proud, while my dad seemed shocked. As I spoke, he became quiet, stood by me, and placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a kind gesture that really moved me. He said, "They will look for Karen Ann, the reporters. You need to tell her." Suddenly, I realized our divorce might become news. He was right. I hadn't spoken to her since before the divorce. I wondered how she would react. I tried to call her, but I got her voicemail. I left a message. "Karen Ann, I need to talk to you right away about the shooting at the hospital. Please call me as soon as you can." She was probably in class since the school year had just started. I felt that many people needed to know the truth before the media did. I left my parents' house and drove to Maria's parents' home. I knocked on their door, and Mrs. Gray answered. "John, what a surprise! Come in," she said. "I need to discuss something important with you, ma'am. It's about the hospital incident. It's urgent," I said as I entered. "Okay," she replied, looking a bit confused. "I'm here alone. Maria is at work and Tom is out." "What is it?" She seemed worried. "It may not mean much to you, but the files on the hospital shooting will be made public today. Most of the people involved in the attack have been caught. I didn't share everything before, but I shot the 2 attackers. I also hurt my hand, but I stopped them." She looked at me, relief washing over her that it wasn't about Maria. Yet, the news surprised her. "Tom mentioned that you hurt your right hand and you're right-handed. He thought you were holding back on us. Now I understand," she said. "I believe there might be a lot of media attention soon. They could find out my name, maybe even my photo," I warned. I could see her putting the pieces together. "They might discover that Maria is my girlfriend," I added. Her face lit up with a smile. "That sounds wonderful. Maria has faced so many challenges." "Your girlfriend?" I smiled back. "You should probably tell Tom before he hears it elsewhere. I doubt reporters will come after him, but I wanted you all to know. My ex-wife, too. You might want to keep a low profile for now," I said. "Should I tell Maria at work?" Mrs. Gray thought for a moment. She often took her time to think things through. She was very wise and rarely acted without careful consideration. After a bit, she said, "I think that would be a good idea, especially if there are reporters looking for your friends. Do you really think they'd be interested in her? How would they even know you two were together?" "Anyone could have seen us," I replied. "I don't think they would pursue her, but they might follow her to find me. I'm hiding out at the rectory, so I should be safe. I plan to just say no comment and hope nothing happens. I really don't want my close friends to feel upset that I didn't tell them first." She said, "I'll call Tom right away. You should find Maria and tell her. If you can't find her, try her phone." I was about to head out the door. "Oh, John," she said as she followed me. I turned to see her behind me. She placed her hand on my arm, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed my cheek. "I'm proud of you." "Wow," I said, "almost as nice as Maria's. I'll see you later." She smiled as I headed to my car. I found Maria at her work, taking a break in a small room the workers used to eat and store their things. A desk clerk had directed me there. She said, "Just knock and go in. We don't like to keep the door open with the heat." I knocked and entered. There was Maria, sitting with Eva and eating yogurt, along with 2 other workers at the table. Eva spotted me first. "John, I didn't expect you here." Maria turned and stood up to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Well, it seems I'm getting kisses from all the Gray women today," I joked. She turned to her friends. "Margie, Tony, this is John Buck. John, this is Marge and Tony. Pleased to meet you. Maria, I need to speak with you privately just for a moment." "All right, let's go outside and sit under the elm tree." It was warm outside, but the shade felt good. We found a picnic table, and I noticed she looked worried. Maria, the files about the incident at the hospital are coming out today. When I told you and your parents what happened, I shared the truth, but I didn't tell everything. Now everyone will know. I was the one who stopped the 2 attackers. I know people might try to find me, and they might come looking for you or want to interview you. Reporters. Maria just looked at me across the table. "How did your hand get hurt?" "Dad was confused about how you got injured in your right hand when you're right-handed." "I used my left hand to shoot. I got the attacker, but the bullet went through and hit my hand." I had to hold his arm up so he wouldn't aim at an innocent person. I looked down, then back into her gray eyes. She held my gaze for a few moments. "You saved a lot of people," she said softly. I didn't respond. We just sat quietly for a while. "I should get back to work," she finally said, standing up. I walked with her toward the door when she suddenly turned and hugged me, her cheek resting against my chest. "You really should go," she said, her voice slightly trembling. I gently touched her cheek with my bandaged hand, and then I left. Next, I went to the elementary school, which had just started the new fall term a week earlier. I stopped at the front desk. "Mrs. Percival, I'm John Buck, Karen Ann's ex-husband," I said to the secretary. I remembered her name because Karen Ann often mentioned how important it was to be friendly with the school staff. "Yes, Mr. Buck, how can I help you?" she replied. "I've been trying to reach Karen Ann on her phone today about something that's not urgent but could affect her. Is she in class now? It should only take a minute or two, 5 at most." She pulled out a stapled schedule and said, "She has about 5 more minutes of lunch. I think she's in the lounge. Just go down the hall and take a right. You'll see a sign." "Thank you very much," I said. I found Karen Ann inside, sitting with 3 others and laughing. My heart felt tight at the sight of her, always smart and appealing. "John?" she said, surprised to see me. "Excuse me, everyone. My ex-husband is here. John, what is it?" She didn't seem upset. She was pleasant. One of the other teachers, a man about 10 years older, looked a bit annoyed that I had interrupted them. He glanced at my bandaged hand and smirked. Terry Marks was there too. She nodded, stood up, and left without saying much. "I need a minute. Is it okay if we talk here?" I asked. She nodded. Those dark eyes. No wonder others were drawn to her. "Some police files are going to be opened. My name will be out there. There might be reporters wanting to speak with you." "Me? Why me?" she asked. "Because I'm involved in a case regarding some troublemakers." She looked surprised, but then smirked a little, fitting me into her idea of who I was. Some biases show clearly while others are hidden. She shook her head and said, Sure you are." I tilted my head slightly and said, "I thought you should know, since the files will be public. I may have disappointed you, but I was never dishonest. Sorry to bother you. Please take care of the kids." I turned to leave. As I walked out, I heard her laugh and say, "He has some wild ideas." I realized that if I had been famous before our divorce, maybe she would have seen me differently. I went back to work. As the day came to a close, Father Mihalis called my office. "John, could you come by my office before you leave?" "Yes, sir," I replied. I gathered some notes he wanted summarized for a meeting and went up to his office. I knocked and his secretary, Kathy, said, "Go right in, Mr. Buck." I entered, and Father was on the phone. He finished his call and waved for me to sit down. Once he hung up, he said, "Okay, do you have those notes?" I handed them over and he put them aside. "Good. You've been approved for the program in Cleveland starting in a few weeks. You are officially enrolled, unless Kathy is not telling me the truth." From the closed door, I heard Kathy say, "I did not lie. Papers will be here soon by fax to prove it." Father chuckled. He and Kathy had known each other for a long time. He had baptized her children and was often invited to her family celebrations when he couldn't see his own family. Kathy was someone he could trust completely. She had the ability to listen in on his calls if he shut the door, but I never heard her share secrets. I'd also heard she was one of the highest-paid secretaries at the hospital. Now, your name is all over the news because of the incident. They have a picture of you from the Marines and a more recent one of you walking down a hallway here. It looks like it's from our yearbook. Nice picture, by the way. You're on national and local news, right, Kathy? She stood in the doorway. Yes, he is. I've been getting requests for interviews from national news channels, Fox earlier and MSNBC just now. One talk show is even offering $10,000 for the first interview. I shook my head and smiled. I'm sorry, Father. I didn't plan on doing any interviews. That was a terrible day for me. I lost my marriage, my kids, and many people. I can't forget what happened. I trailed off and just shook my head. John, there's help available. I think you should take it, he said. I didn't want to go. Later, I regretted that decision when I learned more about counseling. It would have been good to talk to someone. It felt hard to ask for help when I was expected to manage things on my own. He continued, "Your program starts in a few weeks. If you get the position, which I think you will once the board makes their decision. After that, I have another idea to further improve your skills. A paid break after the program is running. You could attend a master's program in Minneapolis during the summer and work from home for the last part of it. There might be other programs we can look into, maybe a new one starting at Ohio State. We can discuss it. I know someone at UC who may be open to working with you as a special case." So the Cleveland program came first, then the job, then hiring assistants, and finally a break for a master's program. Had he planned my future out for me? He continued, "Get everything ready as best you can, if the papers come." "They'll be here soon," Kathy called from the other room. "Check them over and find the details online. We need you prepared. I apologize that the board hasn't approved you yet, but I don't want anyone else for the role. I told them I wouldn't consider other candidates until they made a decision about you. They probably won't decide until December, by the way. Sorry about that. They can be slow when they don't like how I go about things," he said with a laugh. I had never thought someone might risk their job to help me get one. Kathy chimed in with a hint of surprise. "Oh, a fax just came in. Why, it's the Cleveland program details for John Buck," Father said. "Take these home and say hi to Phil. Tell him I'll be there Sunday night." As I left, some reporters were on the front sidewalk, but I slipped out the back and headed to the parking lot. They didn't recognize my car, so I was able to leave without any trouble. On Saturday evening, I went to Maria's house for dinner. Thankfully, they hadn't been bothered by reporters yet, and I hoped it would stay that way. I didn't know how Maria would handle the stress of the questions and cameras. Tom and I talked about the shooting, and I shared my experience. I figured Tom had figured out it was me from the video and my injury, but he didn't bring it up with anyone else. That was just how he was, calm and careful. Later, when Sally arrived, I told them about Karen Ann, Dunstan, the kids, and how Father Mahalas was trying to help me find a new job. Maria sat next to me on the couch, and after a while, Tom and Sally said goodnight, leaving us alone. After her parents left the room, Maria became bolder. She leaned closer and kissed me softly. I held her tightly, and we both breathed quickly. I felt a strong desire for her, but I wondered about her past, knowing she had gone through something difficult when she was 20. I didn't know much else about her history. Did it matter what a serious boyfriend knew about his partner's past? We had only been together for a short time. We weren't going to rush into anything. I was still cautious, especially considering where I lived. I smiled to myself, thinking about my life in a rectory. The idea of being together there was funny, but I knew it could bring challenges for her. After a few more kisses, I gently pulled back, trying to control my feelings. She seemed to sense my hesitation and kissed me a little harder. Why was she so open? Maybe it was because she had been waiting for someone like me. I whispered, "Not yet. I care about you, but we need to take our time." "It's you," she replied. "I see so much good in you, and I've waited for someone like you. I haven't had a boyfriend in a long time." "That's good. I don't want any competition," I joked. We enjoyed a quiet moment together. I finally sighed, stood up, and said goodbye. We kissed at the door. I avoided the news on the radio and TV all weekend, worried it might mention me. On Sunday, I sat in the large, dim living room filled with comfy chairs and a couch. The fireplace was empty, and I enjoyed some iced tea I had found in the fridge. Father Philip came home around 7, made himself some cold pasta salad, and we had that for dinner. About an hour later, we went outside to sit, and Father Mike joined us. Phil went inside and got some sparkling water, which he poured into a wine glass. We sat quietly for a while. Finally, Phil spoke up. "Father Mike told me you did something very brave, and that you faced a big loss during your divorce. I understand now what happened on that difficult day at the hospital, which led to your divorce. I admire your strength, John. Father mentioned you have a hidden resilience. I think it shows your character." I didn't reply. We all looked out at the darkening Ohio sky. The two priests just rocked gently in their chairs. It was peaceful. Father Mike finally said, "Security can keep reporters outside, but they can still see you when you drive up or walk in, even if you use the back entrance. They can help you get through if there are too many." I chuckled. "Sounds like something out of a comedy movie, doesn't it? Do you think they're bothering Karen Ann?" Phil replied, "Yes, they are. One reporter called her the recently divorced wife, and another said she knew nothing about your whereabouts. She has her kids to care for, and when a reporter asked her something, she got upset and said no comment. As far as I know, she hasn't given any interviews." Father Mike added, "You have received many requests for interviews. Late-night talk shows, Fox News, local TV in Cincinnati, Dayton, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and various newspapers." "I guess I'm finally getting the attention I deserve," I said with a hint of sarcasm. "Now that I live with a priest, I'm famous." Father Mike found that funny. I continued, "Yet it feels like humanity isn't doing too well lately. Divorce, disagreements, and pride. Then I met this wonderful woman, moved into the nicest place I've ever been, found a job I liked, and made 2 good friends." "Let's make a toast," Father Mike said. We raised our drinks, to not always getting what we deserve in life. We all agreed. After all, these priests believed in the idea of original sin. For some, life was a constant challenge against their own flaws. We sat in silence, thinking about human nature. It was a lovely evening, and eventually Father Mike went off to do something else, and Phil headed to bed. I remained on the porch, watching the night sky and reflecting on things. The 2 priests viewed me differently than most people. To Father Mike, my humility was a given. To Phil, I seemed strong, but to Karen Ann, I appeared less capable. I felt that many would share her opinion. I often used humility to cover my own insecurities. Just as my girlfriend had fallen into her doubts, I had my own set of just good enough thoughts. Not all of my choices lacked good intentions, but many about my career had been made out of fear. I was scared of not doing well, but I realized it wasn't really failure if I didn't even try. Father Mike was pulling me into a program he was starting, pushing me to think about my future as an adult. As the hospital became more important, Father knew it needed skilled people to grow with it. Was I a true hospital manager or just someone doing a job? I decided that the police and Homeland Security reports could tell my story for me. It wasn't just being humble. The worst day of my life, the day that ended my marriage and took my children from me, wasn't a day for me to make a name for myself or earn money. I did not want to remember that day. The hospital didn't need a famous person connected to a crisis. I believed that more attention often meant more trouble. Articles were written about me for newspapers and TV, and I became the center of those stories. The newspapers said I kept to myself because they couldn't find where I lived. One TV reporter even called me a virtual hermit. I was now a known figure, and maybe my reclusiveness made them even more curious. My friend Phil would find articles about me and share them, and we'd talk about them while sitting on the porch. My parents talked to some reporters. They said I had a normal childhood and were surprised when I chose to join the Marines. My mom described me as gentle, and my dad agreed. Some saw me as a hero, others didn't. Most opinions were positive, but not all. Questions arose about how I came to be in certain situations. One news outlet asked about something I might be hiding, while another hinted that I didn't give the attackers a chance to back down, suggesting the incident was not as the media reported. One claim even said I was a weapons expert because I had run a rifle range for my last 7 months in the Marines. I found that amusing. You don't need to be an expert to accurately shoot a gun up close, even with your non-dominant hand. Many of these mistakes could have been avoided with a little more research or careful reading of police records. I wondered how seriously journalists took their jobs. Over the next few weeks, I started going to work early, parking in a lot behind the hospital that actually belonged to another business. I made sure to arrive before sunrise and slipped in through a service door that was usually busy with delivery trucks at that hour. I would greet the hospital staff I knew, while no one else seemed to notice me. I saw reporters outside during the day, and I was told that 2 were watching the area where I had parked before. By the time I returned from the program in Cleveland, they were gone. People began to recognize me during my shifts. For a while, I enjoyed informal attention. Strangers would point me out in the hallways, while hospital staff would mention my name casually to friends. Many stopped to thank me for my efforts, and some kids even asked for my autograph. Writing was tough because of my hand, but I signed 2 papers and 1 cast. I decided to step back for a while. I started learning to type, which was slow and hard, but I managed. My hand got tired quickly. Cleveland would be a challenge. On my first day back at the cafeteria, one of the servers spotted me. She came out from behind the glass cases, gave me a hug, said nothing, and then returned to her station. Some visitors smiled, not really understanding why she hugged me for just getting coffee. I turned to a woman behind me and said, "It's a hospital thing, we all hug." She smiled at my words. Then I heard some workers calling my name, and everyone started clapping, which made the visitors join in too. I joked, "What does a guy have to do to pay for his coffee around here?" This made people laugh. I left with some friendly pats on my back and had to drink my coffee black. A few people were taking pictures. At lunch, I went back to the cafeteria trying to blend in while chatting with a guy visiting his wife and newborn in maternity. Everything was good with them. He mentioned his wife was busy caring for little Lena, so he came to get some food too. He was in a good mood, and his excitement reminded me of moments I wished I could forget. I congratulated him and shook his hand. "I'm John," I introduced myself. "Barry," he replied after checking my name tag. "Yeah, I hear that a lot," I replied, smiling and hoping he wouldn't say more. He smiled back, which helped me feel more at ease. This time, a doctor pointed me out to someone else. I heard my name whispered and then spoken openly. People looked around, so I did too. The cashier wouldn't take my card. "Sorry, Mr. Buck, this one's on us. You did so much for us and your money's not needed here." "Thanks, Megan," I said, wishing I had thought to grab a dessert. I took my food to a quiet table away from everyone. I enjoyed my peace for 10 minutes. After finishing, I returned my tray and walked through the crowd when someone snapped a photo with a flash, catching everyone's attention. I waved and kept moving as I heard my name called again. How long would this last? I didn't want to feel like a curiosity. Many messages came down from the hospital staff. TV shows wanted me for interviews. My favorite was The Tonight Show. I thought about it but decided not to. They could read the reports about what happened. I had my own rule and I would stick to it, not because I couldn't handle the attention, but because what happened was terrible and I didn't want to draw more focus. I asked the hospital, Kathy specifically, to send a response to all interview requests, saying simply, "No comment, I have nothing to say." I do not want to promote more bad actions by discussing this terrible event. I had known Maria for almost 2 months. It wasn't a long time, but it was enough for me to think deeply about her. The last week of September came, and I had to drive to Cleveland. The day before I left, we went to a quiet park with a small path and a waterfall. We sat on a big rock and talked while watching the water. I held her hand. I said, "Maria, I think I'm ready to fall in love with you. I've known you for a while now, and I've shared everything about myself. You've also told me what matters the most about you. There's nothing about you I don't like. You're beautiful, kind, and smart. I want to be close to you. It's hard to keep my distance, but I'm not ready for a serious commitment. I'm not asking you to be exclusive or anything like that. That feels too young. I just want to know if you feel the same way. I'm not making any promises and I don't want any from you right now. I just need to know if I'm on this journey alone." She took my other hand, holding both of mine. Taking a deep breath, she began, "About 10 years ago, I was in college in Louisville. I had a new boyfriend named Brandon. I had only known him for 2 weeks and we had gone out a couple of times. He seemed nice. One night, he took me to a party with some friends. I trusted him, but it wasn't a party at a typical house, just a place some people rented. Brandon was drinking and his friends started taking pills they said were drugs. I wanted to leave, but they wouldn't let me. They turned up the music really loud and made inappropriate comments, touching themselves and trying to touch me. My boyfriend held my arms and his friends tore my shirt open. They thought it was funny. I was crying and begging them to stop. They were mocking me, and I felt so scared. Just then, a neighbor came to the door because the music was so loud. Brandon let go of my arms for just a second, and I kicked one of the guys and ran. I got outside, but one of them grabbed my arm, which made me hurt my shoulder. I was screaming because I was so frightened and in pain. The neighbor heard the noise and yelled at them to let me go. A police car arrived and they ran away. I was hiding under a bush, scared and confused. The neighbor found me and took me to the police. Brandon denied anything happened, but I was hurt with scrapes and bruises. The neighbor told the police what she saw, and because of that, Brandon and one of his friends went to jail for a little while. The third guy spoke against them, but I couldn't speak in front of a group. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I was not thinking clearly. I felt confused for days. I was in a mental hospital, she said. She sighed and continued. I hurt my shoulder when it came out of place, but they put it back without trouble. The bruises and cuts healed, but I withdrew from everyone. I stopped going out. I didn't visit stores. I even stopped going to church. I took 4 or 5 baths each day. I haven't had a boyfriend since then. I just didn't want anyone in my life. I couldn't believe it. She was so lovely that I couldn't understand why someone wouldn't want to be around her. How could a man not cherish her happiness? I'm so sorry, Maria. I'm shocked by what you went through. I don't know what to say. She kissed my hand gently. It's been a long time. My therapist, Carrie, says I need to choose to join the world again. I want to. I'm ready to fall in love, John. I've never been close to a man. I've spoken with my mom about it, and they are worried because they know how hard it is for me to leave home, to shop, or even walk outside at night. I overheard them once, and they said they didn't think I could have a normal relationship. My mom was in tears. I asked, "Do you think you could have a relationship?" She held my hands tightly. "Only since I met you." I leaned in and we shared a soft kiss. It made us a little unsteady, and we reacted too slowly. I shouldn't have let her hold both my hands. We slipped and fell onto some rocks. Luckily, there was a shallow pool below us, about 4 feet deep, and we landed with a splash. We were soaking wet and laughing as we climbed out, a bit scraped but fine. By the time we returned to the car, our clothes were drying. My wallet got wet and stayed soggy for a week, but I remembered that kiss each time I spent money. Years later, she told her mother it was the best kiss she'd ever had. I felt the same. I called Karen Ann just to inform her that I would be out of town. She was supposed to get the house ready to sell soon since I was entitled to half of the value. When I called, her machine picked up, so I left a message. The Cleveland program aimed to prepare counselors and administrators to support doctors and other licensed people in keeping their credentials up to date. Hospitals did not want to lose good doctors whenever they took time off or needed to upgrade their skills. They wanted them back. I felt out of place in the Cleveland program. Most students had degrees in hospital-related fields like administration or management. I was a liberal arts major. To catch up, I studied late into the night, sometimes calling Father Michals for help, and I didn't hold back from asking questions in class. A few students and teachers recognized me as that John Buck, and eventually everyone did. I just asked them to keep it quiet, and they respected my wishes. I announced my news during class when some people were talking about it. We decided to go to a nearby cafe and move on. I shared what had happened and mentioned how hard it was to type because of my injury. I also bought another round of drinks to lighten the mood. I thought my brief moment of attention had come to an end in October. About a week later, a professor surprised me in front of the class by saying that we received a gift, a program that would let me talk to my computer and have it type for me. Once I figured it out, my life got much easier. Everyone clapped for me, and I was grateful. Most weekends I drove home, but I didn't go back in mid-November. We had to prepare presentations for Monday, pretending to counsel a doctor who was experienced and educated. We had to identify when their license needed renewal, options for upgrading, including classes and nearby colleges that offered them. We also had to think about how long it would take and other important details like the doctor's age, expected retirement, and potential income from an upgrade. It wasn't thrilling, but it was real work. We needed to understand the doctor's situation, including family matters. I was assigned to a 34-year-old heart surgeon who wanted to upgrade. He had a wife at home and a baby on the way. My task was detailed, but many doctors didn't usually need such in-depth information. They preferred specific programs rather than broad options for the future. I ended up writing a lot, but talking clearly was all that was necessary. It went well. I called Maria, and we both talked about missing each other. At the end of our conversation, she said, "I love you." I was surprised and hoped she was smiling. "I love you too, Maria." After hanging up, I felt like a teenager saying something important. The program would finish in the 3rd week of December, right before Christmas. The course was helpful, though it could be a bit much at times. Each professional was responsible for keeping their licenses and skills up to date. It was up to them to understand the rules in their field and keep track of any changes. Counselors were there to guide and support, but ultimately, the responsibility was on the professionals. I was learning about the tricky world of medical licenses, and it was quite challenging. Father McHowells mentioned one night, "That's why each discipline has its own responsibilities." I planned to return to Merciful Lord after Christmas, and Father McHowells and I would start organizing the new department. The program helped me find the needed accreditations and details about programs across the country and even the world. My job was to make sure everything worked out well for everyone. We couldn't let good doctors leave us forever just because one wanted to volunteer or learn something new. We hoped the successful doctor would return to us. I called Maria a few times each week. We talked about family. She hadn't met my parents yet. Sports, and life in general. Our chats were nice, usually ending with simple words of affection that felt natural. But then I began to notice some feelings I didn't expect. I couldn't help but think about her and wonder if she felt the same way. I came home one Saturday morning with a certificate, some earned credits, thick binders, and many websites I'd need to keep updated for changes. I also had recommendations from 2 of my instructors. It was a challenge to think about updating the old system. I knew I would have to visit hospitals to learn how they did things. Luckily, medical associations were starting to work together more. I drove straight to Maria's house. It had been almost a month since my last visit. The weather was cold and gray, but thankfully there was no snow or rain. When I parked, Maria opened the door and ran to greet me. Her mom looked surprised, but happy to see her so excited. Maria embraced me in the yard and gave me a warm kiss right in front of her mother. She was lovely, and it felt nice. We walked to the door, which Mrs. Gray held open for us. "Welcome home, John." She gave me a friendly kiss on the cheek. "It's good to be back. I really enjoy being home," I replied. We chatted about the program and how it would change my work. Mrs. Gray sent us to pick up some vegetables and groceries. We headed to the farmer's market across town, a big place where local farmers sold fresh produce. It wasn't the best season for it, but there was also a grocery store nearby. Maria held my hand as we pushed a cart around, and it felt nice to shop together. In the canned goods aisle, we bumped into Karen Ann. Maria noticed I tensed and asked, "What's wrong?" "Karen Ann and her baby," I replied. We approached them. Hanley looked adorable at 9 months old. Karen Ann seemed busy, as if she had a lot on her plate. She always had a strong presence. "Hello, Karen Ann," I said when she spotted us. She looked back at me, then at Maria. "Oh, hi, John," she said, glancing at Maria. There was a moment of silence. "Karen, this is Maria Gray." "Maria, this is Karen Ann Prynne and her daughter Hanley." Hanley, being young, avoided any awkwardness. Maria spoke up, holding my arm tightly. "Hi, Karen Ann and Hanley." She reached out and shook Karen Ann's hand. "John has told me a lot about you, Karen Ann. It's nice to finally meet." Karen Ann hesitated before replying. "John, there's a lot we need to discuss. The house is for sale, but there haven't been any offers yet. Can I call you?" I wanted to remind her that I had left many messages, but I just nodded instead. "Of course. I'll be available in a few days," I said. "I've tried to reach you, but the house phone doesn't work and your cell just goes to voicemail." Karen Ann brushed that aside. She seemed to want to be the one to make the next move. We all sat in silence for a moment. I didn't see the need to fill the quiet. Surprisingly, Karen Ann showed a hint of jealousy. "So where are you living now? Are you and Maria together?" This side of her was unexpected. Maria, usually quiet, stepped in. "We live on the other side of town," she said, hinting that we might be living together. I had to suppress a laugh. Father Philip would find that amusing. "Well, I hope you're happy," Karen Ann said. "I need to keep Hanley moving before she gets restless. I'll call you, John." "Sure. Good to see you, Karen Ann, and Hanley, too." We separated, eager to avoid each other for the rest of our time in the store. It had been an uncomfortable moment. "Poor Karen Ann," Maria said thoughtfully. "She's struggling to decide whether to admit she made a mistake or be upset with you." It was a sad situation. She had burned a bridge before realizing she needed to cross it again. I figured that worked in my favor. "Karen Ann is really pretty," Maria said. "Is that the type of woman you find attractive?" She seemed hesitant to bring up specifics, but it was clear that Karen Ann had an attention-grabbing look. "Yes," I replied. "I admire women of all shapes and sizes, but my feelings for Karen Ann weren't just about looks. I believed she had stronger qualities, yet I was mistaken. Honestly, I think I might be better off now." Maria was trying to be careful with her words. I have a lot going on in my life. It's not a competition. You are honest, kind, and lovely. I don't wish to go back to her. I want to be with you, and I'm excited about our journey together. As we headed to her house with the groceries, I realized I needed to show my appreciation. Her mother had prepared a wonderful meal for my first evening home, while I talked about the program, and Mr. Gray engaged with questions. Afterward, we quickly cleaned up and loaded the dishwasher. It was around 7 in the evening. I glanced at Maria. I'm going to see my parents. Do you want to meet them? I knocked and opened the door for Maria. My parents were there, coming to greet us. I hadn't seen them in a month either. I looked over at Maria. She was small and shy, with her bright red hair tied back in a ponytail, which made her pale skin stand out. My mother gasped softly at the sight of her. My father stayed still, showing some effort to remain calm. For a small woman, Maria looked lovely tonight, dressed warmly for the chilly weather. Mom, Dad, this is Maria Gray. We've been seeing each other for a few months, and I thought it was time you met. There was a brief silence as Mom searched for something to say. Maria was captivating. Quiet and beautiful women didn't usually fit in my dad's world. Most pretty women were loud and flashy, but Maria was gentle and kind. Dad seemed to notice something deeper in her, beyond her looks. To him, as to me, this made her even more intriguing. Maria spoke softly, making my parents lean in to hear her. I had seen this side of her before, shy and reserved, but now she looked at them with confidence. I thought she must really want to make a good impression. At first, they struggled to hear her words. Welcome, dear, my mother said warmly, shaking Maria's hand and leading her into the living room. Dad stepped back and shot me a glance that fathers give their sons when they bring home someone special. I felt a strong hope that everyone would get along, and it seemed to happen just as I wished. Maria was so easygoing. She sat comfortably on the old couch, ready to talk about her new boyfriend. My parents could easily be charmed by a pretty face, but they soon saw there was more to her. It was a little hard when my parents started asking her about her life and work. I knew about her tough times recovering, but they didn't know her background. Still, she handled their questions honestly, even if she left out some details. She shared stories about her recent job, how her family had helped her, and a hard time that had changed her life. My parents were respectful and didn't ask her to elaborate. She looked at me and smiled, holding my arm or hand gently. Mom brought out ice cream, and we all enjoyed bowls as it melted. It turned out to be a lovely first meeting. Dad laughed heartily as Maria told stories about her dad and her childhood in sky gray. Maria's laugh was soft and cheerful, and she had many chances to share it as first Mom and then Dad recounted stories of my own childhood adventures in sports. Maria said she came from the town's early founders, Gray and his wife, She Who Shines. In reality, she was related to their adopted child, one of peace. She wasn't sure what parts of the family story were real and which were made up, though her father had some old records, diaries, and stories passed down. This caught the interest of both me and my dad, as we liked learning about local history. As we left, we promised to come back soon. My mother hugged Maria, and both my parents stood at the doorway while we walked into the night. I took Maria's hand and led her to the car, opening the door for her. Once inside, I turned on the engine. Your parents are great, Maria said. You really know how to impress people, I replied. Sometimes I wonder if you're too good to be true. I'm just me. I care about you. It's incredible. At her house, we stepped onto the porch, bundled up in our heavy coats. I kissed her goodnight in the chilly air. There was something special about those moments before committing to anything more serious. In the quiet, I could hear music in the distance. Chapter 8. All is Said. When I returned to work in early January, Father Michalos shared his plans for my new role. The board has approved a new office for you. You'll be in charge and will have a secretary to handle credentials and keep everything updated, he explained. He went into detail about how he wanted things done, asked for my thoughts, and discussed how many people we would need to hire. He had a booklet with plans and suggestions to discuss. I borrowed a lot from your reports and ideas from last summer, he said. I also used information from my previous job at Good Sam in Minneapolis. He wanted to understand how our program in Cleveland would work, so I explained about databases, professional groups, and contracts. He wanted me to visit larger hospitals to see how they managed things. The board had formed a committee to guide us. They were creating a step-by-step plan based on Father Michalas's booklet and their own knowledge. Some were on boards of other hospitals, and one, Dr. Johansson, ran a similar program. They wanted to meet me. I was surprised. An office, an assistant, and possibly more in the future. You can choose your own secretary or assistant, either from our current staff who agree or from new hires. It's your decision. I'd like to see the job description you create before we post the position. Your new office will be renovated just above the main entrance. Your title is Deputy Chief Executive for Professional Credentials. You will report to me and will work alongside the department heads. They agreed to this new position for you. They see that many people are falling through the gaps in care as the hospital gets bigger. It's not just about keeping licenses. They feel like some are just using this place as a temporary stop. They promise to support you and won't be upset with any questions you may have, even about simple things like the wall color. He smiled, meaning the department heads wouldn't mind if I asked something that seemed silly. It was a lot to process. I hadn't looked after others since my time in the Marine Corps. I wondered if this was happening because of the recent events. Father, am I getting this job because of the past events? He leaned back in his chair, looking serious. It was important to him, like it touched on deeper values. He rubbed his fingers together, first looking at them and then at me. I noticed the need for change here last April, 2 months before that day. I thought you would be a good fit for the role, but I must be honest. There are some gaps in your experience, mainly because of your age. You're 29, almost 30, and you'll be working with doctors much older than you. Some might be full of themselves, while others can be insecure or critical. You did good work, but since you only have a bachelor's degree, some might not take you seriously. We thought you would do well in the office, but weren't quite ready to lead it yet. Then came the shooting. After we learned who stepped in to stop it, and the fact that you didn't appear on TV, radio, or in magazines, the department heads started to see you differently. I mentioned sending you to the Cleveland program while keeping your pay here, and they agreed. They know you are friendly and respectful, never speaking badly about anyone. They are aware you had chances to share your story, even for money, and they reconsidered you. It wasn't the event itself that got you this role, but the way you handled it. They began to trust you. At the last meeting, everyone was on board with creating this position for you and wanted it up and running quickly. I arranged for an office renovation. I want to place your office right in the main area, making it easy for doctors to find you when they need to update their credentials. I'm really happy, Father. I might need some advice. I'm here for that. Phil can help too. The supervisory committee, Dr. Johansson, and all the department heads know you. They may be ambitious and tricky at times, so your calm and understanding attitude might benefit you. They might not grasp the importance of a good leader's character. He smiled at that. I'm feeling a bit nervous now. Thank you, sir. I will... He cut me off. Don't you want to know how much I'll earn? He paused and added, I can tell you they probably won't get you. He shared the number, and I felt good about my future at Sky Gray. I entered my new messy office. There was clutter everywhere. The construction workers looked at me as if I was in their way, so I quickly moved to another part of the building. Later that afternoon, I got a phone call that made me forget my promise to Father McCalls. I agreed to an interview. Hello? I'm trying to reach John Buck, a young male voice said, sounding familiar. This is him. I wasn't a fan of talking on the phone. I thought it was mostly just for making plans or talking to people I liked. This is Tony Spagnol, Mr. Buck. You remember me? Tony! Wow, it's great to hear from you. How did you find my number? I called the hospital and they connected me to Father Mike. He said you wouldn't mind. Anyway, Mr. Buck, I have a favor to ask. I have a friend who's working for the school newspaper. She thinks it would be huge for her to get an interview with you since you haven't done any. She's interviewed me and Mom, but we've done lots of them. I even made it to CNN once. He sounded proud of himself, and I understood why he felt important after going through such a big event. He continued, She wanted me to see if you would say yes to an interview. Would it be a big deal if a school reporter got the first chance? I hadn't had any requests lately. There had been enough news and worry about bombings that many people felt distant from the tragedy at Merciful Lord. Give her my number and ask her to call me, I replied casually. When would you like her to call? He asked. Any time. Tell her now, okay? I chuckled. Good to hear from you, Tony. Say hello to Marilyn and Cal for me. Sure, Mr. Buck. Bye. I heard him whispering as he hung up. He could have just handed her the phone, and that's exactly what happened. Her call came right away from the same number. I found this amusing. Hello? Mr. Buck, this is Susan Daggers. I'm a reporter for the Clark High School Gazette. I was hoping you'd agree to an interview about the Merciful Lord Hospital shooting. Would you consider that, sir? Are you a good reporter, Miss Daggers? I asked. I'm learning. I think I've written some solid stories about crime near the high school and some students who got into trouble. However, my advisor wouldn't publish one about the gangs. I try to be truthful as best I can. Is this going to be a report about what happened, or will it be more of an opinion piece? It's a report. I read some police interviews about you, but I found them a bit unclear. You read them, huh? So it seems she had done some homework even before I agreed to the interview. They interviewed me several times, but I think their reports were all mixed up, I said. You can talk to me. Can you come to the hospital? I can show you where everything happened. I could hear cheering on the other end of the line. She seemed excited about this opportunity. I smiled, remembering what it was like to be 15 again. Can I come on Saturday? That way I won't skip school. Morning would be best since I have a basketball game later. How about 9 in the morning? You can bring a camera if you want, but I'd prefer no pictures of me. You can record my voice, though. Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Buck. I'll be there at 9 on Saturday. We hung up. I had almost forgotten how eager I felt when I was young. On Saturday, she arrived right on time. I saw her walk to the information desk to ask for me. Jody noticed me coming and smiled. You must be the reporter, Susan Daggers, I said to the girl, who was tall with cornrowed hair. She wore a dark suit and low shoes, carrying a notebook and a small recording device. Jody could hear everything. Susan turned to me with a smile. You look just like your picture, she said. I try to avoid cameras, but some have caught me. Would you like to talk in my office? Better yet, I can show you around the hospital and where things happen. You can take pictures. I'd just like to keep my face out of them. I want to keep a low profile. She replied, I'm a bit disappointed about the picture, but I understand you want to be safe. So, where did everything happen? Right here, I said, glancing at Jody. Have you given any interviews? Jody answered, I was mentioned in a few stories, just a line here and there. I thought you didn't give interviews. Only when I believe it's important. Jody nodded with a smile. Susan asked, Were you involved, ma'am? Jody responded, I lost part of my spleen when I was hurt. Susan looked surprised at this. A lot of people were involved and some are still grieving. We need to handle this carefully, I added. She nodded. The trouble started right there and Jody was one of the first affected. I showed her where everything happened and explained my actions, helping doctors into the classroom, finding Tommy's things, and heading to the cafeteria. She took photos of each area, especially the waiting room where many were harmed. I shared my experiences in the cafeteria. Tony was right here, I pointed out, and one of the attackers had his arm around him while pointing a rifle at security across the room. Spagnuol was here, I said again, and her guy had his arm around her neck while he pointed a gun at her head. His other weapon was on the floor. Maybe it jammed or he didn't have time to reload when the security team showed up. I waved to the guards, then I moved in and took down Mrs. Spagnuol's guy while knocking his gun away. The shot hit him and I hurt my hand in the process, I said, showing her my hand. After that, I moved to Tony's guy and shot him too. He was looking right at me and I hit him below his eye. They both fell, and thankfully Tony and his mom were fine after it all. I held up my right palm, which had an angry scar. That's something, she said. I read you used to be in the Marines. Did that help you? The Marines taught me to quickly understand what's going on and take action. Once I saw a way to help and keep myself safe, I acted. It was fast. It took me maybe 10 seconds to make my move. They were caught off guard with the hostages in a tricky spot. And the guy you took the gun from? He was already out of it. Then I found Jody. She had been shot and was in pain just where you saw her, worried about whether she was going to live. I remember saying, I hope not, or something similar. She told me she thought only 2 people were involved. Were you married at that time? Yes, but we're divorced now. That happened not long after the shooting. Was she glad you weren't more hurt? I think she was. She joked that I must have been a bad shot since I hit my own hand. I like that way of thinking, too. Did what happened play a part in your divorce? She asked. Was she really only 15? You might have a talent for journalism, Sue, I said, taking a deep breath. Yes, it showed us both that we weren't meant to stay married. It was really hard, the worst time of my life, both at the hospital and at home. Why did you wait to give interviews? She asked. Because it just makes more violence happen. One attack leads to another, and it creates a cycle. It was a terrible moment, ending so many lives. I don't want to think about it. I'm sharing because I want it to be over. Susan was a pleasure to talk to. We enjoyed some ice cream from the cafeteria machine and talked about that day, who lived, who didn't, and what it all meant. Then she asked if it changed how I see life. It's like anything else. People think I handled it well. That's good because it could have gone much worse. I had some bad dreams afterward, but I felt like I was doing something to help. With that feeling, I found peace. 2 hours had gone by, and her mother was about to pick her up. Are you playing in a basketball game? Yeah, we have a game against Merciful Savior here in Sky Gray at 4 o'clock. Maybe I can make it. My girlfriend went to Savior. I'd like to read your story in the paper. Is that okay? I can send you one or drop it off. I pass by here a lot. My mom works nearby. She's a lawyer. It should be in on Friday. Oh, here's my mom now, she said, and stood up. I stood up too. Her mom was tall and elegant, dressed nicely, probably a role model for her daughter. Miss Daggers, we were just wrapping up. I'm John Buck. I introduced myself as we shook hands. She had a big smile. My daughter is excited to interview you, Mr. Buck. She convinced me. She thought I'd do anything for Tony, so she had him call me. She laughed lightly. Tony has a bit of a crush on her. I smiled at Susan. Good to know he has good taste. We all smiled and soon said our goodbyes. I warned Father Mike about the interview. He thought it was a great way to ease any curiosity about me and the incident. He chuckled. High school paper? Tony's? Good idea. I called Maria and asked if she wanted to go to the basketball game at her old school. She was unsure at first, but then agreed. Just before 4, we found ourselves in the stands to watch Merciful Savior play George Rogers Clark. The bleachers were full of fans from both schools that Saturday. We sat on the Merciful Savior side, and Miss Daggers waved at me. Maria spotted some familiar faces and greeted them. We found our seats, and I pointed Susan out to Maria. She's tall. Yes. Did you play basketball? I did until I realized it's mostly a tall girl's sport. The women in my family are usually short, so we played sports like softball, soccer, and lacrosse. Not much volleyball or basketball. I used to play third base in baseball. I wasn't great, but I could hit and had a good throw to first base. I mostly sat on the bench for basketball in high school. Maria smiled, enjoying the friendly chat as if she knew I wanted to impress her. Really? I said, and Maria smiled back. The game was enjoyable. Susan played wonderfully. Sadly, Merciful Savior lost in a close match due to a free throw by a Clark player. Maria cheered for her old school, so I tried not to feel too excited for Susan's victory. It's tough to root for a team when you only know one player. After the game, Maria and I chatted with a few of her friends, and I introduced Susan's mother to her as the teams got ready. I could tell Maria was happy to be back at her old school. She had felt a bit nervous at first, but seeing familiar faces brought her energy. She laughed, joked, and cheered for the plays during most of the game. Maria, usually quiet and reserved, got really upset over a call during the game. I looked at her, her face as red as her hair, small but fierce, standing up and demanding fairness. I felt a bit sorry for the referee. When she saw me smiling as she took her seat, she playfully hit my shoulder. I could still see the Maria I knew, the one who came down the stairs at her house and wouldn't let me leave. It amazed me all over again. On Friday, Susan's story came out. I found a copy of the paper in my work inbox later that day. The headline read, "The Savior of Our Merciful Lord Hospital." It was featured on channels like Fox and CNN. Being called Savior became my nickname thanks to a school project. I smiled and shook my head at that. Named by a kid. In interviews, Susan said, "He doesn't want this to become a bigger tragedy. He says it was the worst day of his life." Susan was getting well known in her own way. I was happy for her. Of all the stories written about me, the one by Susan Daggers sparked interest from someone deep within the IWC. He saw her on CNN, and Homeland Security later found out he had recorded it. He wasn't rushing, but he had plans for the infidel savior. Nobody knew he was in the country illegally, and he had recently contacted an old friend online. This friend wasn't part of the IWC, but news travels fast. Yassine was still out there in America. Phil grew fond of the nickname that started when a high school girl gave it to me. He found it amusing that he was living with the savior of our merciful Lord. In March, Karen Ann called. She sounded serious and a bit cold. We talked about the asking price of her house and similar topics. It was a small and somewhat old house. I thought the price was a bit high, but she wanted to keep it there for now. When I mentioned the children, she said she didn't want them around anyone living in a way she considered wrong. She said, "I don't want my kids around people who live together without being married." Yes, she really said that, even though she had 2 kids from one man while she was married to another. I wanted to laugh, but held it back. Karen Ann, Maria and I aren't living together. We never have. We care for each other, but we don't live together, I explained. You made an assumption, and we didn't correct it. I'm sorry. Karen Ann was quiet. I wondered why she wasn't angry or confrontational. Finally, she said, "John, I wish things were better between us. Good night." Then she hung up. Chapter 9. The Power of Love. Sometimes I would meet Maria at Mass either on Fridays or Sundays. We would sit together through the service, she would have her communion, and afterward we'd go for breakfast at a local diner or to her workplace on Fridays. We would hold hands. Maria greeted people she passed by, even if she hadn't really met them during her many quiet years. We chatted about her therapy sessions, baseball, politics, religion, books, and just about anything else. She said she was a natural redhead. I told her she would have to show me someday. She thought for a moment, then, with a playful grin, replied, "Someday I plan to." My heart skipped a beat, but it was a friendly kind of flirting. We were not kids anymore, and as the weeks turned to months, I noticed the difference. We would watch TV with her family, stroll around the tennis courts as kids played, or read in the same space. Sometimes she came to my parents' house to chat with my mom, and then she'd invite me to her place for dinner. Mom and Maria went to garage sales together a couple of times, and Dad mentioned watching a Reds preseason game with her. I had never thought my girlfriend would connect with my parents like this. I shared stories about Maria with my family, the challenges she faced, and what caused her to be so reserved. They noticed this in her, but they also saw her with me, and she seemed just fine. It was a good sign that she was reaching out to them. My parents talked about her lack of a college degree and her job, things that future in-laws might discuss. They never meant to criticize, and now they recognize the long-lasting impact of her struggles. "She's very kind," Mom said. I didn't want to assume too much. We spent time together several times a week, but not every day. I cared for her deeply, but it had only been a year since my last relationship ended. We enjoyed our time together and shared gentle kisses, but we took things slow and avoided taking it further. I still had a lot to learn about her. Sometimes she seemed eager. Other times she pulled away. We talked about our feelings, but it felt like she was looking for reassurance. I wondered if she was worried about her parents' feelings. I later learned it was really about what she felt inside. One Sunday in early April, Maria invited me over for dinner. She and her mom were cooking while her dad grilled steaks. I was taking my time getting comfortable with all these new relationships. I arrived an hour early to catch the Reds game on TV. Mr. Gray came outside to put the steaks on the grill and joined me to watch the game and chat. Finally, I asked, "How are you related to the founders of Sky Gray? Is it through you, Mr. Gray?" So, the steaks took a back seat as he shared the history of the town. I learned about the scout named Gray and his wife, who was called She Who Shines, and their child, one of Peace Gray, who was found on the trail during a historic battle. He explained how Peace's son, Sky Stephen Gray, ran a road stop that was originally called Sky Gray's Stop, which eventually became simply Sky Gray. He talked about brave actions from 200 years ago, mentioning figures like Mad Anthony Wayne, Fallen Timbers, and the Treaty at Greenville. Most importantly, he spoke of Michikaniqua, the great Miami chief who wanted peace with the settlers, who kept a small agreement made with General Wayne at a farmhouse still used by Ben Gray. I said, My father will really enjoy this story. The steaks were overcooked, but the rhubarb pie made by Maria and her mom was tangy and delicious. The women looked a bit let down. We men thought everything tasted fine. As late spring came, the two priests and I began to sit on the porch again on Sundays, watching the sun set, the moon rise, or the rain fall. Sometimes I would sit alone at night reading a book with a flashlight or my e-reader. I didn't have a set time to start work. I just had tasks to complete. I liked sitting on the porch with the priests or getting lost in a book. I missed the kids. Karen Ann said the house had an offer, but she was not happy with it. She thought about it for a while. It was simply too low, she decided. I wondered if there was another reason for her feelings. As a single parent, the house was a good size for her family. The utilities were cheap, the mortgage manageable, and the house was in a nice part of town on a quiet street with similar homes. She knew the neighbors well. The kids could easily walk to a playground, and maybe she wanted to keep what they might inherit. I thought she might want to stay until she found someone else. One Sunday in mid-May, Maria called me. This was unusual. She had spent the day with her parents at a flea market after early mass, and I hadn't seen her. She just wanted to chat, she said. She asked what I did on Sunday nights, so I invited her over. She arrived after dinner around 7:30 p.m., while it was still light outside. Far's Mike and Phil were sitting in rocking chairs, and I was in a comfortable chair. That lovely redhead walked up the sidewalk, hands on her hips, wearing shorts and a light, short-sleeved white shirt. It was a striking look. "So, this is some kind of men's club, huh?" she asked, pretending to be annoyed, but her voice was normal. Later, I thought about how relaxed she seemed. She knew Phil and me, and having another priest around likely made her feel at ease. Only Mike was new to her, though she didn't know who he was. "You're always welcome, Maria," I said. I stood up, which was a little tricky from my chair. I walked down the steps to greet her. Father Mike and Father Phil also stood. "Maria, this is Father McCalls, the hospital chief. Mike, this is Maria Gray, my girlfriend." They shook hands, and I noticed a sparkle in Mike's eyes. "My pleasure, young lady. Phil and John have told me about you." "It's nice to finally meet you," Mike said. "It's a pleasure, Father," she replied. "Please sit in either the Adirondack chair or the garden chair," I said, helping her to my Adirondack. Phil laughed, and Mike smiled. I pretended to be annoyed and sat in the garden chair next to her. The Adirondack had a perfect view, but I tried to focus on the conversation instead. I held her hand gently. Holding hands has always been something I enjoy. Every Sunday, Maria would join us, sharing laughter and stories. She had learned quite a bit about her family history from her father, so I often asked her about it. Phil and Mike found her stories about the area fascinating. Phil was new to Sky Gray, having come from another parish after completing his training, while Mike had worked in various Catholic hospitals before arriving in town. They both felt that learning local history, even parts from hundreds of years ago, would help them connect with the community. They assumed the name of the town was about the weather, unaware it was named after a person. They noticed that the community seemed very focused on its own history. There were schools named after notable local figures and historical events. Maria enjoyed discussing what she knew about the town's past. Over the months, she began to change. She grew more confident and engaged with others. I found myself developing feelings for her, and it felt mutual. This wasn't going to be a fleeting romance. I started to think seriously about asking her to marry me. On the Sunday that marked a year since a tragic event, the news was filled with stories about the shooting and about me. There were reports on what had been uncovered during the investigation and discussions about improving safety for travelers. Articles featured the backgrounds of those involved and called for better understanding and security measures. One report mentioned a man named Yassin Talib, who had been following these stories. He worked at a motel to save money for college, but felt lost in life. Yassin had thought about going home, but feared that his family would see him as unsuccessful. His brother had fought bravely and met a heroic end, which added to Yassin's feelings of inadequacy. In one of his last messages, he reflected on the pain and confusion he felt. Yassin always approached his thoughts with careful consideration. One analyst from Homeland thought he was trying to find a way out of a situation. Maria asked me to join her for her therapy session one Thursday evening in June. Her therapist had suggested that I come along. I took this as a sign that I was becoming important in Maria's life, so I met Dr. Carrie Morgan. She was about 50, tall and strong. She had a warm smile and eyes that showed she was very wise. "Mr. Buck, I'm glad you're here," Dr. Carey said. "Maria means a lot to me. I will come whenever she or you ask," I replied. "Has Maria shared her feelings with you?" she asked. "Yes, we've started talking about marriage. I got divorced last August and I met Maria right after that," I explained. Maria added, "John has met my parents and I've met his—" "That's great," Carrie said. "Do I have Maria's okay to talk about her situation with you?" Maria smiled and said, "Of course." "All right, John, let's put you on the spot. What signs do you see in Maria that show the challenges she has been facing for many years?" "She seems a bit fragile and unsure of herself at times. She gets easily frightened, whether it's the dark, groups of people, or approaching strangers. She hesitates to make phone calls, as if she has to gather her strength. When she meets someone, she speaks very softly at first, making it hard for them to hear her. But then she grows more confident as the conversation continues. I've seen similar traits in other people too," I said. "So you think her challenges are manageable?" Carrie asked. "Yes, absolutely. She pushes herself to do what she needs to or wants to do. She feels more comfortable with priests. I saw her relaxed and friendly when she met my boss. I can imagine her as my wife and as a mother handling everything with me." It felt strange to say these things out loud, with Maria next to me, sharing my hopes with someone I had just met. "Maria, what do you think about that?" Carrie asked. Maria was sitting on a couch beside me, holding my hand between hers. "I've been opening up more since I met John, but I still depend on him a bit. Tonight, I'm a little nervous about this meeting, so I'm holding his hand," she said with a smile. "I can see that," Carrie said. "It's completely normal to seek comfort from someone you care about when you're feeling anxious. I hold my husband's hand too when I feel that way." Maria said, "I don't worry about small trips to the store anymore. I enjoy going to church again, and I'm thinking about joining the council or something, even if John doesn't participate there. He doesn't believe. I'm thinking about the future. The children I dreamed of having seem closer now. Marriage feels possible, but I worry I might make mistakes." She paused, overwhelmed by her feelings. In her mind, having a child and raising a family was her main goal and what she saw as success in life. I thought about her parents, and it all made sense. Carrie smiled and asked, "What do you think about Brandon?" "Brandon was the boyfriend who hurt her," she explained. "I dislike him, but it's different now. If I saw him in a store, I'd just walk away. I used to think I would get really upset or break down," she said. At that moment, she seemed calm, her eyes bright, and she held my hand gently. "What would you do if John wasn't there? Could you handle an emergency with a child?" Maria was quiet. "I worry I might freeze or hide. I don't want to do the wrong thing or make things worse," she said. She squeezed my hand tighter, imagining tough situations anyone might face. A kitchen fire, a child climbing too high, or another one playing near a hot stove. She was scared of failing to protect the child or accidentally causing harm. She feared she wouldn't react if something went wrong. Carrie said, "I believe you will do your best and make the right choice in any situation. That's all we can do." I remembered a scene from a movie where a mother asked her husband how many young players were scared of losing their father's love each time they played. The husband replied, "All of them." I said to her, "I will always love you. No matter what choice you make, for our kids or anyone else's, I know you will do your best." She took my hands in both of hers, and Carrie watched. We talked about various things, the incident at the hospital, my brief moment of fame. Over the years of therapy, Carrie had become a friend to Maria, understanding her well, but she was still a professional. This wasn't a therapy session for couples. It was about Maria, her personality, her values, and her worries. Carrie said, "Remember how long it took for you to run on your own, get a job, and do it? You made friends, met a man, and started to fall in love. You're going to movies and church, becoming more independent and making plans. John, much of this is to support you or because she really wants to be with you." Then Carrie looked directly at Maria and asked, "Have you two taken the next step in your relationship?" She gazed into Maria's eyes, as if the answer was very important. Maria looked surprised and replied, "When we decide it's important for you to know, we'll share that. If we were here to talk about that, we would." Carrie paused and then laughed. and I realized why she had asked. She knew Maria quite well. The surprise faded from Maria's expression when she noticed me smiling. "She reminds me of some Marine wives I knew," I said. "You seem to know her well, Doctor." Carrie smiled and replied, "She has strong beliefs about how people should act and what is private versus public. That's part of why she puts so much pressure on herself. I think we can reduce our meetings to once a month for now, Maria, and end them in a few months. I believe you're ready. Of course, you can always call me for an extra meeting if you want, and I might check in on you too. How does that sound?" Maria was a bit surprised, but then she got it. Carrie saw a strength in her frustration. "Good, great. Are you sure?" Carrie just smiled and nodded. Maria took a deep breath as if this moment was meant to happen, and now it was here. "What will I do on Thursday nights?" she asked. "You'll think of something. Maybe play softball, join a choir, help out at a food pantry. You'll be fine." Both of them felt a joy knowing that many years of struggle were finally getting better. I stood up. "It's been nice meeting you, Doctor." Maria hugged Carrie and they exchanged some quiet words, probably about me, and then we left. ###. Chapter 10. Because You Care. Maria invited me to her cousin's wedding in August, which was the biggest family gathering I had ever been to. I wore a tie and a sport coat. Maria helped me fasten the top button on my collar since my neck felt tight, and my right hand wasn't cooperating even after 14 months. Dr. Beadle said it was unlikely to get better. I managed the tie myself, though. August was very hot, and I didn't know the bride or groom. I only recognized Maria's parents and family members she had introduced to me over the year. Maria wore a light green dress that looked lovely. It was hard not to notice her, and a few men did. I told her later that I'd noticed them and planned to talk to them. The ceremony took place in a small church a few miles south of Sky Gray. There was no school for this little parish, so the kids went to schools in Sky Gray. As we arrived, Maria dipped her fingers in the holy water and crossed herself. I walked beside her to the bride's side of the church. The bride was Teresa Gray, marrying a man from Hamilton named Bryce Garrison. I wondered if Bryce was Catholic since there was no mass at this wedding. We sat in one of the last pews, and I noticed some people looking our way, usually with smiles. A little girl waved to Maria from a couple of rows ahead, and Maria waved back. By the time the ceremony started, the church was full, and the air conditioning was working hard. The reception was indoors in a room beneath the main area of the church. There were so many people that every table was busy. Maria guided me from table to table, introducing me to people and vice versa. I smiled and admitted I'd probably forget all the names. Maria went from table to table sharing stories about our family. She talked about Aunt Lori, Aunt Dr. Beth, and Cousin Bob, who had just been released from jail. She filled me in on all the family gossip, strange happenings, and illnesses. I asked her, "Why are you telling me all this?" "Because Mom always said you shouldn't marry someone who doesn't know every family secret and unusual character." I raised an eyebrow. "So you think I might want to marry you?" I said playfully. "I believe it's worth thinking about," she replied with a smile, and then kissed me. It wasn't just a quick peck. I noticed several people nearby start to applaud, and I felt my face heat up. I sat beside her quietly for a moment. She chatted with Aunt Gertie or Uncle Link, and then I took her small hand in mine. "I love you too," I said softly. She squeezed my hand in return. I wanted to talk to her, just the two of us, about important things. Thoughts about marriage, family, and our future floated in my mind. I felt the need to discuss things that couples talk about before making big decisions. Beliefs, children, homes, dreams, feelings. Life held so much promise, and I imagined a future with someone who truly wanted to be with me. I needed to talk to her, and it felt important. I moved my chair closer to Maria's, just as someone took the microphone and dimmed the lights. He started announcing different people in the room, shining a spotlight on them. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard him call my name. "Let's give a round of applause for John Buck, who helps at the Merciful Lord Hospital. Stand up, John." The spotlight found me and Maria, who deserved the attention far more than I did. Still, I stood and waved as everyone clapped, then sat down quickly. I leaned over and whispered to Maria as the noise faded. "Loving you can be a challenge sometimes." She chuckled and replied, "I think my dad might have something to do with that." I teased her. You owe me, Gray. It's lucky you're the most beautiful woman here. She gazed deeply into my eyes, her own dark blue and full of warmth. She leaned against me in the soft light of the hall, and we shared a sweet kiss. It felt just right. I noticed the smiles we received from her family and friends. I figured many of them had hoped she'd find happiness and welcome this moment. With her next to me, kissing my lips, everything felt gentle and good. Each kiss with her felt special. One day when you're ready, I want you to ask me to marry you, she said softly, trying to be heard over the noise around us. That's good to hear, I replied, my lips close to her ear. I wouldn't want to ask without knowing how you feel first. The DJ started playing music and I asked her to dance. She wrapped her arms around my neck as we moved awkwardly together during the slow songs. We paused during the fast ones, but I think her parents enjoyed seeing us so close and happy together. As the evening was ending, we shared a gentle kiss on the dance floor. I took her hand and told her parents we were heading home. Her father hesitated for a moment, as if wondering why I was taking her home that night, but then nodded. Maria went to the restroom and I stood with her father. I love Maria, I said. I can see that. She and I are happy about it. I believe she wants to marry you, John. I think she's grown stronger since we first met. He nodded and placed his hand on my shoulder. She is special, and meeting you has been a blessing. Are you ready to propose? I wanted to wait a year after my divorce, and now I've known her for a year. Yes, it will be soon. She means a lot to me. My words were quick and clear. Her father smiled. We should have a barbecue with your parents next Sunday afternoon at our house. I agreed. Just then, Maria and her mother returned, and we left hand in hand. I invited her to a nice restaurant near Dayton for Friday evening. I made reservations and asked her to dress nicely. She did, and I wore a suit. It was early September, still warm. I made sure to touch her often. I held her hand, brushed her arm, and gently rested my hand on her shoulder. She smiled at my touch and leaned her head into my hand. I whispered, "You look beautiful. I can't take my eyes off you." I didn't want to bring up anyone else tonight. The lighting was soft, and I was grateful. The table was small, set with a candle. I held her left hand as I spoke. "Maria, I have never felt this in love before." She replied, "I want to be here with you. It doesn't matter where we are as long as we're together." I felt every one of her fingers as I softly said, "I love you too. I hope you will always love me. I'm still learning what love feels like. I hope you'll say yes." I took out a ring from my pocket, still in its box, and opened it. In a quiet voice, so only she could hear, I asked, "Will you marry me?" I turned the box to show her the ring. "Yes, yes," she said softly, first looking at the ring and then into my eyes. "I promise to love you. I'm so happy that you love me." I took the ring and gently placed it on her finger, feeling the importance of the moment. I smiled and held her hand tightly. Her eyes sparkled brightly in the flickering candlelight, a deep shade of blue. "John," she began as if saying something she had rehearsed, "since the first time we spoke, I've wanted you to love me. I never thought it would happen for me. I thought love and families had passed me by. No man was right for me." A few tears fell quietly. We enjoyed our wine together. I held her hand, glad to see that the ring I had chosen seemed to fit perfectly. Some people at nearby tables noticed her tears, the ring box, and our intertwined hands. They smiled, understanding our special moment. It was a warm and lovely evening. The service was great, and the food was delicious. The woman beside me was truly special, willing to share her life with me. We left the restaurant around 9, walking closely together. She would rest her cheek on my arm from time to time. "Do you have more planned for tonight?" she asked. "Yes and no, but I'd like to stop somewhere for a talk, a place where we can discuss what engaged couples need to discuss." We found that spot just outside of Sky Gray, a beautiful area by the water that was calm and nice in mid-September. "If we go somewhere, will your parents mind?" I asked. "No, it's our choice." She called her parents to let them know she'd be late. Her father said, "We love you and understand. Are you engaged?" "Yes," her mother added. "I'm so happy for you. Come home safe tomorrow, dear." We parked the car and I reached into the back seat for a bag. I thought it might get chilly, just a blanket and a quilt. We strolled in the refreshing evening air, hand in hand. The sky was dark, and we were alone, with only the sound of distant traffic. We sat on a park bench, looking out at the wetland shimmering in the moonlight. She leaned against me, and I held her close. I whispered softly in her ear, "Maria, I really care about you. There are some things we haven't talked about." She looked at me and replied, "I've been a bit unsure about those things, but only with you have I started to imagine feeling safe and happy." She took a breath. "I want to explore this part of our relationship, but I want it to be right. I'm 30 and waiting has been hard for me. It's time, John. I want to be close to you. I trust you. I've never felt this way with anyone else." I held her tightly against me as we looked up at the moon and stars shining down, reflecting off the calm waters. She gently placed her hand on me, and I leaned in to kiss her. She smiled at me, and I felt warmth in my heart. We shared a sweet moment wrapped in the night. It was a quiet moment. "I know a place," I said, pointing to a small hidden path through the trees and bushes away from the main trail. She looked surprised. "Outside?" She smiled. "Let's go." There was excitement in her voice as she took my hand, and I kissed her gently at first, then a little more firmly. We held hands as we walked along the path, wearing our nice clothes, she in a dress and low heels. The path led up a small hill, grassy and soft, with a view overlooking the water. A gentle breeze stirred the air, making it feel cooler. I spread out the quilt we had brought with us, and Maria looked up at the stars, then back down at the peaceful landscape. "Perfect," she said softly. I stood behind her, wrapping my arms around her. She leaned back into me, relaxing in the quiet of the night. We sat down on the quilt together, just enjoying the calm, the view, and the comfort of being close. Her eyes shone as she glanced over at me, and I could see how much the moment meant to both of us. "I'm going to take care of you," I said, holding her hand as she smiled, her face reflecting trust and warmth. We shared a quiet moment, lying together under the stars, holding each other close. There was no rush, no need for words. The world around us felt far away as we simply enjoyed the peacefulness and the closeness between us. The night passed with nothing but the sound of the breeze and the calm water in the distance, as we stayed there together, content and at peace. It's an image that stays with me. Maria and I lying under the stars, sharing a quiet, intimate moment in the soft glow of the moonlight. We sat close together, the night air cool but peaceful, and the world around us seemed to disappear. I held her in my arms, and we just stayed there for a while, talking softly, enjoying each other's company. There was a warmth between us, a sense of connection that felt deeper than anything I had experienced before. Her head rested on my shoulder as we gazed up at the sky, filled with more stars than I had ever seen. The moment felt almost timeless, with nothing but the soft sounds of nature surrounding us. At one point, we shared a kiss, gentle at first, then more meaningful. The quiet of the night seemed to amplify everything: her touch, her presence, the sense of closeness. We lay down on the quilt, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling the comfort of simply being together. After a while, we covered ourselves with another blanket to keep warm in the cool breeze, and the night passed in peaceful silence. I must have drifted off at some point, dreaming of the warmth between us and the feel of her resting next to me. Later, as the night deepened, we stirred, moving together in the quiet darkness. There was something almost magical about the moment, as if we were the only two people in the world, sharing something special beneath the wide Ohio sky. We stayed close, whispering to each other, both of us content and at peace as the night slowly passed. It felt like time had stopped, and all that mattered was the closeness we shared, the comfort of knowing we were together. In that serene and quiet space, we simply rested, surrounded by the beauty of the night and the connection we had found in each other. Her head rested on my chest, a gentle smile on her face. After some time, we woke up, cuddled together in the chilly air, and gazed up at the sparkling night sky. She softly said, "It was perfect, John." A little later, I stood up and looked down at her lovely face. I shook my head and told her, "Before I die, I will kiss every freckle you have." She giggled at my words. "You can't see them in this light, but I can't wait for it," she replied. After that, we got dressed and brushed off the leaves and twigs from our clothes as best we could before heading back to the car. I drove her home, walked her to her door, kissed her goodnight, and let her go inside alone to see her parents, show off her ring, and maybe talk about our new relationship. Later, she told me they were surprised she was home by 3 in the morning. They thought we had gone somewhere else. Maria said she just smiled, shook her head, and said, "Better. Some things are too special to share." The next morning, I called my parents and told them I had asked Maria to marry me and that she said yes. My mom squealed with excitement. I imagined her jumping up and down. Dad simply said, "Good, good." I couldn't remember how they reacted when I proposed to Karen Ann. The following morning, I picked them up to take them to a picnic. When we arrived, I introduced Mom and Dad to the Grays, and the smiles all around looked genuine. Mom and Dad hugged Maria and admired the ring, and I felt like Mom had found some sort of connection with my future wife. Maybe she had. The Grays and the Bucks were easy to talk to. There was a feeling of friendship and interest among us, sharing stories about the town and our lives. Mr. Gray accidentally burned the hamburgers, but the food was still good, and the day felt warm and welcoming. I sent a message to Karen Ann, suggesting that she keep the house since she seemed settled there. I mentioned that if she decided to sell it in the future, I would expect half of its value from the divorce, which would be about $5,000. It wasn't a small amount, but I didn't want her to feel pressured since moving would be hard for her without using her children's funds. The kids deserved a stable home. Our divorce had turned our marriage into a burden for her. I had moved on. 3 days later, she responded that she'd spoken to her lawyer and that I would soon receive some papers to sign. 2 days after that, the papers arrived, and I signed them. We set the wedding date for March. This gave me time to adjust to my new job situation, which was growing as my office expanded. I now had 2 assistants and 3 full-time specialists. I wondered if they felt okay working under the least experienced person in our department, but nobody complained since I was the one who hired them. I was starting a master's program created for me by Father Mike and a professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. I worked mornings or afternoons in my office and took classes or seminars at different schools or hospitals depending on the day. My notes to my dad became notes and essays for Dr. Lauren Fortner, who taught hospital administration. The University of Cincinnati had started the cooperative education program a long time ago, so they were supportive of my situation when Dr. Fortner helped me. This would last for about a year, maybe a little longer, based on how I was doing. The hospital was covering the costs, and I also received a federal grant. Maria wanted to get married in the Catholic Church, which meant I had a challenge to face. I needed to apply for a declaration of nullity to annul my first marriage in the church's eyes. This was easier than I expected, but it took some time. My first wife's unfaithfulness was clear. The birth of my son Dylan within 18 months of our wedding showed that she wasn't honest from the start. We had even been apart for a long period in the beginning. Several people wrote letters about my character for the church to consider, including Father Mike, Father Phil, and Maria. A few months later, the board approved my application, and I was free to marry Maria. Ironically, my Protestant mother was the happiest about my approval. A few weeks before our wedding, we bought a house that was ready to move into, located less than a mile from Merciful Lord Hospital. It was a short walk to Maria's job, and it was also close to Merciful God Church and the elementary school. It wasn't far from the public school either, which I reminded her. That could be a discussion for later. She wanted to keep working until she found a better opportunity. Every extra moment we had was spent cleaning, painting, buying furniture, and getting the house ready. The house wasn't perfect yet. We still needed more furniture, some painting, and a few repairs. But whoever finishes working on their house completely. In any case, we would return home from our honeymoon to our own place. I had been living with a priest, and she had been living with her parents. Now, 13 months into my new job, we could afford to live in the older part of Sky Gray. The house had a porch, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen and dining area, and a living room. It had wooden floors and older but functional appliances. It was a fresh start for us. We could hear children playing in the fields behind our house, but we would also have to deal with dust during the summer when the fields were being used. At the far end of the park, there were basketball courts, a tennis court, and a public pool. We planned to get married at Merciful God Church, with Father Mike officiating. Since I didn't have a formal connection to a church and Maria was Catholic, the priests felt it was important to understand my beliefs. They wanted to make sure that if we had children, they would be raised in the Catholic faith. Catholic organizations had helped me find my footing, giving me a job, helping me through a difficult time, and ultimately introducing me to Maria and some of my closest friends. So, agreeing to raise our future children Catholic wasn't a difficult decision for me. We attended a series of meetings for engaged couples called Pre-Cana, meant to help couples reflect on the realities of marriage. Some of the other couples seemed to have never discussed important topics, like how they would raise their children or how many children they wanted. I think Maria was surprised to see how little some couples had thought about these things. Our wedding was smaller than some, with about 100 guests. Maria wore a beautiful light blue dress, her hair gently framing her face. She looked like a painting, graceful and serene. I wore a black tuxedo. Her friend Ava stood by her as the maid of honor, and Dr. Phil, dressed in his formal dark cassock, stood by me. When Father Mike said we could kiss, Maria gently touched my face with her hand as I leaned in for a soft kiss. My mother later told me it was the most moving kiss she had ever seen. I still remember the soft touch of Maria's fingers on my cheek at that moment. We left the reception early, around 9, and spent our first night together in a small motel. Maria kissed me sweetly, wrapping her arms around my neck. She said she wanted to change into something special and asked me to give her a moment. I relaxed on the bed, leaving a light on. When she returned, she had a quiet confidence about her. She smiled at me, her eyes full of warmth, and asked if I was ready to share this special night with her. We spent the rest of the evening together, just enjoying the closeness and quiet of the night. It was a beautiful, simple moment, just the two of us, beginning our life as husband and wife. "Oh, John," she whispered softly. I held her close, marveling at how light and delicate she felt in my arms. I gently laid her down, keeping my embrace warm and protective. Her eyes were full of trust, and I leaned back for a moment, looking at her with a sense of wonder. She slowly stretched out, her movements graceful, and the room seemed to fill with a quiet kind of intimacy. She smiled up at me, her voice soft and full of affection. "I love being here with you." The night was filled with tenderness. We spent those hours in each other's arms, sometimes full of energy, sometimes simply resting in the quiet warmth of the moment. It was a remarkable thing, how love can be both strong and gentle, filled with passion one moment and soft affection the next. By morning, we were content, both of us quietly enjoying each other's company. It wasn't just about what we shared physically, but the deeper connection between us. The hesitancy that once marked our relationship was gone. Maria looked at me with bright, trusting eyes, and at one point as we lay together, she said, "I'm so glad you came into my life. Being with you makes me feel like a better person." Whether she became pregnant that night or sometime later, I'm not sure. Maria was always full of love and excitement, surprising me with her joy. Sometimes she would pull me into an embrace, laughing, eager to share a moment of closeness. Other times we'd spend quiet hours together, simply enjoying each other's company. Once, she looked at me with her arms around my neck and said, "I hope we have a boy, so he might take after you." I kissed her, feeling grateful for the happiness we had found together. "Are you saying a daughter can't be like her father?" I teased her gently on the drive back home. She smiled. "I think you should just take the compliment and let me hope our child is as wonderful as you." Remembering how things had ended with my first marriage, I decided it was best not to argue. "Well, I think her mom is pretty amazing, so I won't mind if she takes after you." From then on, I called the baby she, while Maria referred to the baby as he. It confused people when we talked about it, but we found it amusing. We returned to Sky Gray feeling happy and excited for the future, newly married, in love, and ready to start our family. Our house was big enough for children, and we had family nearby to support us. As we arrived, we saw kids playing baseball on the field behind our home, their laughter echoing despite the cool March air and the looming threat of rain. The sound of the metal bat hitting the ball, the cheering, it felt like the perfect place to begin the next chapter of our lives. I carried Maria and our unborn child inside when we got home. It started to rain while we held each other and rested in our bed after a long trip, leaving our luggage soaked on the porch. Chapter 11. A Woman of Character. The police and news had shared my name after what happened at Merciful Lord. Wikipedia even had a small section about the hospital incident. A quote attributed to me was shared widely online. Some people wanted me punished, while others defended my actions as being in the heat of the moment. One online discussion had nearly 100,000 comments about what I should have said after the incident. For over a year, my actions sparked much discussion. There were websites that criticized me, many of them in Arabic. I'm not sure if my mom noticed my sudden fame. She didn't mention my statement, which had some strong language that I know would have embarrassed her. She didn't spend much time online, but she must have seen the fuss surrounding me. Luckily, it faded a lot after Susan's interview and once the anniversary of the event passed. After everything settled down, I got copies of the main reports. Eric Remarque was one of the main writers of one of them. He felt very familiar with the attackers by then. The attackers at Merciful Lord were named Ibrahim Ajah and Youssef Talib. They had a base at a farm in Indiana, about 60 miles away, and drove a rented car to Sky Gray for their plan. They aimed to make a statement in the countryside, showing it could happen anywhere, not just in big cities. They had talked about their plan for months, and entered the country 3 months before to observe the hospital and gather their tools. They left some evidence of their planning, perhaps in emails or chats, which helped lead to arrests after the attack. I didn't learn what happened to their burials or if they were cremated. Later investigations by the FBI and Homeland Security found some details. Yassin Talib, Youssef's younger brother, was in the U.S. on a student visa but allegedly left before his brother arrived. Video footage showed him at the airport weeks before the hospital attack, but the flight he was supposed to be on showed no sign of him getting off. He was not linked to any known groups, so he wasn't seen as a threat right away. When his brother and Ajah carried out their plan, he was in a motel outside Indianapolis, likely supporting them from afar. When the attack happened, he might have been let down by how few people were harmed. They had hoped for much more destruction. Agent Remarque mentioned their messages showed they looked down on rural areas, using words that meant simple folks or country people. With his brother gone, Yassin went into hiding. No one knew where he went until he appeared in Sky Gray almost 2 years later. He gathered news about the Merciful Lord attack, printing out articles from the internet or recording broadcasts from TV. Eventually, he learned that I had confronted the attackers. He saw Susan Dagger's interview on at least one news channel. He must have heard that I did not want to inspire more attacks. Remarque said Susan's interview on CNN was on the disc found in Yassin's CD player. He also heard about my divorce from Susan and others. Through Yassin's questioning, some information came out that wasn't secret. He figured I was scared of retaliation and had divorced my wife quickly after the attack to protect her and the kids. He might have seen one interview with Karen Ann, where she mentioned my actions were unusual for me. She expressed her surprise, saying I was usually quiet and unassuming. She questioned the fuss, suggesting it didn't matter much because I was involved. Yassin probably dismissed her misunderstanding, not realizing how the Buck family faced challenges from within. Yassin, or Yassin as some sources called him, was inexperienced and not very cool under pressure. Remarque noted that his lack of training made it easier for him to hide, but his anger grew over the months. He was upset that his brother died early in the attack and that many others were later caught. He felt alone. His brother had linked him to the group, but the FBI found no sign that the group knew about his small role in the tragic event. He had lived in the U.S. for several years, going to school and checking places his brother mentioned without getting much involved. He was frustrated with how things turned out, but he was a student, not a trained fighter. He struggled with what to do next and took a long time to decide. Finally, he found a purpose. After years among them, he wanted to make them feel pain. He thought infidels had one good quality: they could love their families. His plan was to hurt someone important by targeting his family, hoping to send a message to America. He thought maybe he could escape afterward and return home as a hero. He hesitated, reaching out to friends and family back in the Middle East. He spent a lot of time online and had few connections outside of work and shopping. He prayed more during his isolation. It seems someone whose identity Homeland Security did not reveal encouraged him to seek revenge on the well-known but hidden figure related to the merciful Lord. He still had an old address and believed he could lure me to the house despite the fake divorce. An email was discovered that showed he accepted the mission sent on the day of our wedding. Our wedding did not attract much attention from the media. My wish for privacy was known, and people had lost interest in my life. He began his plan the day Maria told me she was pregnant. It was a mild night in April, about 5 weeks after Maria and I married, the day Maria shared her news. He acted alone, having kept his distance from others since the incident. He had a pistol and several magazines of bullets. He also had 5 cans of gasoline. His plan seemed to involve tying up everyone in the house, making one of them call me if I was not there, and then when I arrived, he aimed to harm us all and set the house on fire. He thought he could escape after that. After dark, he parked on the street in front of Karen Ann's house, using a car given to him by Ajah just before the incident. Karen Ann and the 2 children were in their rooms. Dylan was asleep, and Hanley was in her crib, still awake and making soft sounds. Karen Ann was reading in bed with a drink on the nightstand, but she had not had too much to drink. It was around 10:30 p.m. Talib went to the back door, found it locked, and forced it open, breaking the glass in the process and slightly hurting his shoulder. He rushed down the hall, looked into the master bedroom, and found Karen Ann, who was trying to reach for her phone. She screamed and wished she had it closer. Talib grabbed her by the arm, pointed the gun at her, and made her lie face down on the bed. She was likely very scared at that moment. He put the pistol to her head, told her to cross her wrists behind her, and then used plastic ties to bind her. They worked well. Karen Ann begged him not to harm the children. He pulled her into the living room and seated her in a chair, using tape to secure her legs to it. Her back was to the front window. He found the 2 kids, picked them up under his arms, and placed them on the couch. He tied their wrists and ankles with plastic ties, but they were not tied to the couch. When he placed a strip of tape over Karen Ann's mouth to quiet her, it didn't work well, so he had to wrap it around her head multiple times until it held. He waited for the children to calm down, but they continued to fuss, so he wrapped tape around their heads too. It was getting close to 11. Once everyone was more settled, he unwound the tape from Karen Ann's head, causing her some discomfort as it pulled at her hair. He asked for my phone number, but Karen Ann wouldn't share it. She finally gave it to him when he pointed the gun at Hanley. He insisted that she call me and bring me over right away. He called her. It was 11:13 at night when she rang me, according to my phone. "Hello?" I answered. I recognized Karen Ann's number. Maria and I were coming home from visiting our parents, sharing some good news. "John, it's Karen Ann." She sounded louder than usual. She took a breath. "You need to come over right away. It's Dylan. He's missing, and I can't find him." I paused, thinking this might not be serious. Why was she asking me for help? She sounded very anxious, speaking quickly. "You've checked all the rooms and behind the couch?" I wondered where a 3-year-old could go in such a small house. "Yes, he's just gone. His bed is empty. Please hurry, John. He's never done this before. Be careful." Click. I tried to call back, but it went to voicemail. Maria noticed my worry. "What happened?" We stood on our porch. "That was Karen Ann. She says Dylan is missing and she can't find him. I think I should go help." I turned and headed back to the car, and Maria followed me. "I'll go too. We can search better together, especially if he's out in the dark." I appreciated her support, but I also wondered if she was worried about me being around Karen Ann. I thought about calling the police, but figured she probably already did. They might not act fast for a teenager, but a missing 3-year-old would get attention quickly. Why did she tell me to be careful? Maria, she said something strange. She told me to be careful. Has Karen Ann ever shown concern for me before? Maria thought for a moment. No, but maybe she's just worried about Dylan. Yeah, or maybe it meant something else, I said, thinking aloud. Did it have a deeper meaning? I decided to be cautious. Not enough to call the police, but I would be careful. Let's go over, but keep an eye out, like she said. We parked a little way down the street, at an angle where we could see the front of the house. From a distance, I noticed a strange car parked outside. Maybe she called someone else for help or something was happening in the house. It was dark. Maria, the porch light's off. No lights inside either. Does that seem odd to you? When a child is missing, wouldn't they turn on every light to search? Definitely, Maria replied. You'd want every light on to find a missing child. Something might be going on in there, I said. I don't recognize that car. It could be a friend, or it could mean trouble. Stay close to me, okay? I glanced at her in the dim light and she smiled and squeezed my hand. We jogged past our neighbors' houses, cutting through backyards, and noticed a new fence at the Murphy's place, but luckily the gate was open. Maria was close to me as we approached my old house from the side. I walked over to look at the front door. It seemed closed and locked. We shifted to the back door, which was broken open. There were no lights on inside, but the moon was bright and a street lamp lit the front yard. We need to call the police, Maria said. I stepped back from the house and called 911. There's been a break-in, I said, giving them the address. It could be serious. After I hung up, I turned to Maria. Stay here. I might need to get involved, and I can't worry about you. If there are others, just run, okay? She nodded, understanding that I couldn't think about anyone else at that moment. I approached the kitchen door, pushed it open, and heard a slight crunch of glass underfoot, but I managed to step inside. I paused and listened carefully. I could hear muffled cries coming from the living room. It was either Hanley or Dylan. Moving slowly, I peeked around the door frame. The light was dim, mostly from the street lamps outside, shining through the windows. I could just make out shapes, and I noticed that the drapes were pulled back a bit. There was Karen Ann, unable to speak, with tape around her mouth and her hands behind her back, sitting in a chair by the window. To the left, I saw Hanley on the couch, and just beyond him was Dylan, also on the couch. Then my attention landed on a man looking out the front window. I stepped further in. Karen Ann saw me, but I struggled to see clearly in the darkness. The man turned to her and said, "Buck should be here by now, right?" His voice was thick with an accent. He seemed not to be part of a group. Karen Ann made sounds, but the tape prevented her from speaking loudly. He turned back to the window, and I noticed he seemed to have something in his hand near Karen Ann, though it looked relaxed. He was holding the drapes back to look outside. I couldn't approach him without risking her safety since a coffee table blocked my way. But I saw another doorway behind the couch where Dylan was lying. Quietly, I went back through the kitchen toward that other doorway. I signaled to Maria, who was still standing by the kitchen door, that there was one man inside. She nodded. I looked around the corner. There was Karen Ann again. The man was looking out the window, and I was close enough to reach Dylan. But the man held a gun in his right hand, pointing it down near Karen Ann's head. His back was mostly toward me. Did he have a dangerous device on him? That could be very risky for all of us. I didn't see anything, just a cotton jacket, and his hands were visible with no easy way to trigger anything. As he peered outside again, I heard sirens approaching. He was focused, just a few feet away from me. If the police arrived, he might start shooting. I took a deep breath and decided to act. I ran a few steps and hit him with my shoulder, wrapping my right arm around him to keep him from lifting the gun. I remembered what my football coach used to say, "Just go for it," I shouted as I made contact. "Crush!" We both went through the window, tangled in fabric and broken glass. We ended up on the porch, with him under me. I did my best to hold him down and thought I had knocked the gun away. I was filled with anger, and it took him a moment to recover, but he started to fight back. He was bigger and stronger than me, and my right hand felt useless. He managed to roll us onto our sides. The porch light came on. I struggled, hitting him with my left and right hands, but I knew I was losing strength as he began to get back in control. I felt desperate, hoping for the police to arrive or for anything to change the situation. He pushed against my chin, making it hard for me to keep my head up. Then Maria appeared with a gun in her hands. She fell to her knees on the broken glass, and I heard her catch her breath in pain. With both hands, she pointed the gun toward the ceiling and fired a shot into the porch roof, making a loud noise that echoed through the night. We both froze. I felt him hesitate, and silence filled the air, broken only by the distant sirens. Then Maria pressed the gun against the back of his head and said firmly, "If you move, I will shoot." He breathed deeply and shifted slightly, so she pushed the barrel into his head and warned him, "Don't mess with me." Maria's presence changed everything. My left hand was on the side of his head, pressing it into the floor. He stopped resisting, clearly stunned. Blood trickled from where I had hit him. He looked defeated, but I was focused on keeping him down rather than how he looked. I pulled away from him, pushing his head down with my left hand. I quickly got onto my knees next to Maria and felt the sharp pain from my knees hitting the broken glass. Some of my weight was still on his head through my left hand, close to the weapon. "Maria, I'll take the gun," I said, trying to sound calm and in control. She handed it to me without looking anywhere but at the attacker, keeping it pressed against his head firmly. I held it there with my left hand, my right hand weakly supporting it. I was ready to pull the trigger if he moved. Just then, Maria stood up and went into the house as the police arrived. "Help, officers! Help me, please!" I called out. The police came with their weapons drawn, telling me to drop the gun. There was a man and a woman. "Not where he can reach it!" I shouted. I placed it down and pushed it away along the floor. I lifted my hands. I was in pain, with cuts and bruises, but we were all alive. Maria and Karen Ann came out, each holding a child, Maria with Hanley and Karen with Dylan, as more police vehicles arrived and officers rushed in. Karen Ann had tape in her hair. Dylan and Hanley had some too. Karen insisted that they should arrest the man on the floor, and one officer recognized me, so I was finally able to lower my hands. Karen Ann and Maria were around me with the kids, and I wrapped my arms around them. "Are you okay?" I asked Maria. She leaned into me and nodded. Karen Ann on my right spoke quickly, relief and excitement in her voice. "I thought he was going to hurt us. I couldn't find a way to tell you." She was close to me, tears on her face, but her eyes showed strength, ready to protect her children. "You did. You warned me to be careful." She gave me a confused look. She didn't remember saying that. I hugged Hanley too, tightly in Maria's arms, and Dylan, but I wouldn't let go of Maria. She was trembling and I thought she might be crying, but she wasn't. "What a night," I said softly into her hair. She replied, "I didn't want to face the world without you." "You saved our lives," I told her. I felt her nod. I didn't want to let go. "I'm not sick anymore." "No, you're not." She paused as the police moved the arrested man, now in handcuffs. "I think I'll be a good mom." I took a breath and squeezed her, knowing she had faced her fears a little more. She probably smiled, but I couldn't see her face against my chest. For a week, I worried that the stress of everything would be too much for Maria, but she was okay. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. I saw the number and felt a wave of anxiety. I forced myself to answer. Maria was with me and could hear my side of the conversation. "John? This is Karen Ann." "Yes, Karen? I'd like to invite you and Maria over for dinner with the kids, but I hope they're napping. There's something I want to discuss with you." "Karen Ann, I don't." I began. She insisted. "I need to thank you again, and I have a concern. I would really like to talk to you both." "I don't want to see your parents, you know that?" "Never," I said firmly. "Of course, just me and the kids." "Okay." I hung up the phone. Maria was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Why?" she asked. "Are you so angry with her parents?" I thought for a moment. I'd been acting on my feelings, knowing I didn't want them around. Then I remembered the hopes and dreams I had for Karen Ann when we first started our life together. I had seen her parents as support. I think it's because they handed her over at the wedding. It became my job to care for her and keep her safe. They should have supported our marriage as long as I stayed true. Maria nodded. "It's sad, the whole situation." The next Sunday around 2, we knocked at the door of the old house. The window had been fixed. I wondered if it was covered by insurance. Karen Ann welcomed us, shook Maria's hand, and led us straight to the table. The children were napping, she said. We ate lasagna and had coffee. Maria refused coffee, telling Karen Ann she was 2 months pregnant and avoiding caffeine. Karen Ann congratulated her and offered her a glass of water. "That's wonderful news," Karen Ann said. She sounded genuine, but I remembered her wedding vows. That had sounded genuine too. She continued, "You knew you were pregnant when?" "Yeah, that same day the trouble happened," Maria replied. Karen Ann nodded and took a breath. "John, Maria, my mom is not well. My dad is okay, but you know he's not very warm. My parents have supported me since the divorce, but Mom likely won't be able to help with the kids if I can't. That's what I want to talk to you about." I looked at Maria, searching for hints of her feelings. She was focused on Karen Ann, her eyes bright. That look was concerning for me. She understood my feelings about Karen Ann, and I wondered how this conversation would affect her. "You're worried about the kids if you were ill or something happened?" I asked. She nodded. "My parents understand why you don't want to see them, John, and they think it's for good reason." She seemed upset and took a moment. "But they suggested you—" She stood up, went to the refrigerator, and picked up a sealed envelope. "They asked me to give this to you. They hope you'll read it. It's for both of you, Maria. Maybe someday." She slid it across the table to Maria. "Later," she said. She sat down again. "Is this just a feeling, or is something about to happen?" I wanted to find out if she was unwell. "I need to go to a program," she began, looking at the wall. Then she turned to us. "I need to go to rehab. I've been drinking, and I have to get help. My principal gave me an ultimatum. My job is at risk. I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I can't stop. I can't leave the kids with Mom anymore, not for more than a day. After everything that happened, I decided that if anything ever happened to me, I would want you both to take care of the kids. You and Maria. I would really appreciate it if you'd agree. I know I messed up." She shook her head, not saying anything more. Maria asked, "So, you want us to watch your kids while you're in rehab? And if something happens to you, you want us to be their guardians?" "Yes, I trust both of you. I saw how you handled the situation, Maria. You saved us, and the way you comforted Hanley after everything. Please think about it." I spoke the first thing that came to my mind. If something happened, I wouldn't take them to their grandparents. Maria looked at me, and for the first time I sensed she was disappointed. Maria asked Karen Ann, "Your parents live nearby, right?" "Yes," Karen Ann answered, "not far from here." Maria was already making plans, thinking about how to get the kids to their grandparents if I wouldn't. She knew I would still care for her no matter what she decided. Even I thought it was a good idea. I just wouldn't do it myself. I realized she wasn't worried about Karen Ann or how I cared for Hanley and Dylan. She felt secure in my love for her. I was faced with a strong partner, someone who was my equal. Taking a deep breath, Karen Ann said, "If anything ever happens to me, I'm asking you to raise the kids as you see fit. I would trust your judgment. Right now, I'm asking you to care for them for a few months while I sort my life out. My parents won't be part of this. It's my choice, and if you don't want to see them, that's okay." Maria turned to me. "They deserve a family, John. You could have a close bond with them." She understood me even better than I understood myself. That thought bothered me, but I kept a serious expression. Karen Ann spoke softly. "I have nowhere else to turn. There's no one else I can rely on. I'm not asking you to adopt them if it ever comes to that. That would be your choice. I know some good parents who could help, but I want my kids to grow up well. Not like their father. Not like me. Good. You two are my first choice, and really the only choice I have. If not you, it would just depend on luck." She looked back and forth between us as she spoke. She had changed a lot. She had struggled with her drinking, but was being honest about it. From what she shared, her dating life had almost vanished due to the responsibilities of raising 2 kids, managing the house, and working. Because of everything that happened, she had learned one important thing. She loved her kids. Maybe this would lead to more good things. I always knew I would rather play with a child than do anything else. I would never ignore a kid who needed help. Karen Ann was trying to put her life back together. It must have taken a lot of strength and a feeling of being lost to admit she made mistakes with me. She begged us for support. I had received help from 2 priests, a doctor, a lawyer, and many kind people in Cleveland. I had been thanked emotionally by a grateful husband and father, a high school student, police officers, and those in need. It might be hard. I smiled as I held Maria's hand, thinking of a teacher who taught philosophy and never wore socks. What do I deserve? I looked directly at Karen. I paused for a moment and then asked, "How long is the rehab?" "Maybe 2 months, but it depends on the situation." "Summer," she replied. She seemed a little embarrassed, but also hopeful. She knew I was thinking about her request. I could see her determination and concern only for her children. She was waiting to hear one thing. Would we agree to help or not? I said, "We will never be close, Karen Ann. You and I'm not your friend. Some things are hard to forget, and what you did will always be remembered." I thought for a moment about how to express myself. I shook my head as she nodded hers. There would always be some awkwardness between us, and maybe the kids would notice. Perhaps she would find someone else, and all this effort would fade into our past. I felt Maria's presence beside me. She believed in me. She knew me and cared for me. Byron was right. The best feeling was knowing you are loved. It would be scary not to be alive. Maybe I could be worthy of that love. I noticed hope in Karen Ann's eyes when I finished speaking. She had not heard a no. I turned to my wife. We should talk. Maria looked at me, squeezed my hand with hers, and smiled. Yes, we should. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.